das. Viele Tote hat es gegeben. Und deswegen möchte ich meine ersten Worte den Angehörigen und Opfern widmen. Mein Herz schmerzt mir und ich möchte mein Mitgefühl und meine Solidarität gegenüber den Opfern und den Angehörigen ausdrücken. Und ich danke Ihnen allen, die uns von Anfang unterstützt haben, die geholfen haben. Denjenigen möchte ich danken, die geholfen haben, Menschenleben zu retten, wieder aufzubauen und die Normalität wiederherzustellen. Und dies unter Umständen, die wir kaum zuvor je gesehen hatten. Aber gleichzeitig danke ich Ihnen dafür, dass Sie uns ihre Unterstützung zukommen ließen und ihre Anteilnahme geäußert haben. Aber leider ist es so, dass solche Extremwetterphänomene wie in den letzten 2 Wochen in den nächsten Jahren immer wieder öfters vorkommen werden, immer intensiver ausfallen werden. Deswegen ist es einfach notwendig, dass wir das Klima genau beobachten, dass wir unsere Wirtschaft entkarbonisieren, dass wir unsere Resilienz verbessern und dass wir auch in der Lage sind, unsere Reaktions- und Schutzsysteme anzupassen. Auch die Warnsysteme müssen angepasst werden. Und in diesem Bereich versuchen wir seit Jahren fortzuschreiten. Das ist absolut notwendig und wir müssen das noch verbessern. Bei einem so wichtigen Zeitpunkt ist der Zeitpunkt gekommen, um über die Herausforderungen zu sprechen, die es für unser gemeinsames europäisches Projekt gibt. Und dies auf der Grundlage der Vorschläge, die Präsidentin von der Leyen untertragen hat. Und das tue ich in meinem Engagement gegenüber Europa, gegenüber den Europäern, aber auch auf der Grundlage unserer Werte, dem Respekt, dem Dialog, der Solidarität, der Demokratie, der Rechtsstaatlichkeit und der Kohäsion zwischen Ländern und Regionen. Das ist wichtig für uns, nicht nur für uns, die wir auf diesem Kontinenten leben, sondern es ist wichtig für viele Menschen in der gesamten Welt. Und die Träume entwickeln sich, wie Europa sich entwickelt, wie sich die Welt weiterentwickelt. Aber es ist einfach wichtig, dass wir fest auf unseren Prinzipien beharren, die uns jahrzehntelang ein gemeinsames Projekt gegeben haben, wo wir Fortschritte erzielen konnten. Und zwar auf der Grundlage von Regeln, auf der Grundlage der Anerkennung der Menschenrechte.
Conflictos y la lucha contra la pobreza, la apuesta por la prosperidad y oportunidades para todos, sobre todo para los más jóvenes, la lucha por un planeta saludable, habitable, haciendo frente al cambio climático y la pérdida de biodiversidad, pero también la vocación firme de fabricar en suelo europeo más y mejor, liderando la innovación en sectores clave y haciendo un uso eficiente de los recursos, reduciendo la contaminación y generando oportunidades sobre la base de un mercado interior que es un proyecto en curso en el que es imprescindible seguir avanzando. En un contexto de inestabilidad geopolítica y de grandes cambios en la economía global debemos reafirmar nuestra autonomía estratégica y reforzar nuestro tejido productivo. Y para ello sabemos que las transiciones verde y digital son vectores especialmente importantes, como también lo es profundizar en nuestro mercado interior. Porque vivimos en un continente rico en historia, en arte, en cultura, en biodiversidad. Pero no queremos conformarnos con ser un destino atractivo para quien nos visita. Queremos obtener bienes y servicios de calidad. Queremos una economía que funcione. Sabemos que las políticas de competencia nos ayudan a funcionar más y mejor, ahorrando costes a los consumidores, facilitando la inversión en nuestro continente y mejorando la calidad de vida en nuestros entornos. We live in a world that is multipolar, turbulent, uncertain, and full of interdependencies. And still, when acting united, we have the capacity to face the new challenges. We do it in a wise manner, as we did when responding to the COVID and to the Russian blackmail on access to affordable energy. The industrial race to reach climate neutrality is already ongoing, and the speed of change is accelerating. The rest of the world is not going to wait for us. So, let's use our very big capacities, because we know that we cannot afford to fall behind, but neither can we afford to leave anyone behind. Clean solutions, fair transitions, and a competitive, well-functioning single market are at the core of the responses that we need. The European project was conceived as a single market based on a social economy committed to the rule of law. A single market that is a very valuable asset, catering more than 450 million European consumers with 26 million businesses, the vast of them small and medium-sized enterprises employing nearly 136 million people and generating 10% of the global GDP. If confirmed as Executive Vice President for a clean, just and competitive transition, I'm committed to support the objectives set out by the President von der Leyen, going faster in advancing sustainable prosperity and competitiveness, making business easier by reducing the administrative burdens, ensuring a clean and just transition. I will do so by both coordinating the Green Agenda with my fellow colleagues in the Commission and enforcing a competition policy based on our democratic values to support a well-functioning single market. In doing so, we need to promote the alignment and synergies between the clean transition and a competitive European economy. If our economy depends on fossil fuels that we do not produce, we will never be able to ensure prosperity. Europe's long-term competitiveness requires to shift away from fossil fuels while embracing a clean, circular, efficient economy that attracts talent and investments and generates high-quality jobs and products. We must stay on course of our ambitions. This is why I will work with my fellow members of the Colleague to implement our common climate goals for 2030 in the simplest, fairest and most cost-efficient way. To pave the way for a new architecture beyond 2030 to enable us to reach net zero by mid-century, counting on vibrant clean tech sectors and a leading decarbonised industry as part of the Clean Industrial Deal. To ensure access to fresh water and healthy ecosystems, clean energy and an efficient circular economy while reducing inequality gaps. The success will depend on our ability to create prosperity, be competitive while meeting the goals set for 2030 and paving the way for the goals of 2050. In order to achieve this, I will maintain a close dialogue collaboration with all relevant stakeholders, but very much in particular with the European Parliament. And I will promote the coherent use of our toolbox, both domestically and in our foreign policies, to bring down the energy prices and reduce the dependence on fossil fuels and other commodities, to support the decarbonisation of the industry and the economy, to accelerate the just transition and facilitate the access to housing while addressing the energy poverty, to direct our foreign economic policies to reduce risk and vulnerabilities, because it is time to modernise and enforce many things, including the enforcement of the competition policy and capitalise on the benefits of the green and digital transitions. A new approach to competition policy that is more supportive of companies scaling up in global markets and allows European business and consumers to enjoy the benefits of effective competition, acknowledging that external competition cannot last if we give up on competition internally. To progress in ensuring a level playing field, attracting investment, innovation and clean growth, protecting consumers from rising prices while ensuring high quality of goods and services. It's time to safeguard and restore our very precious nature so that we can count on the environmental services that protect our lives and supply the key elements of our economic prosperity. Au cours du prochain mandat, le Clean Industrial Deal devra rester un élément prioritaire. L'Europe doit relancer son tissu productif et industriel, produire en Europe pour apporter de la richesse. Il faudra maximiser l'impact de nos financements publics de manière plus efficace en mobilisant davantage d'investissements privés supplémentaires. Orienter les investissements vers les solutions propres à une application des règles fiscales et des marchés financiers en cohérence avec les critères environnementaux, sociaux et de bonne gouvernance. Développer les infrastructures nécessaires à la décarbonation dans les transports, la connectivité, les interconnexions au-delà des frontières intérieures pour compléter les marchés uniques. Investir dans la formation, l'éducation pour s'attaquer au déficit des compétences et à la création d'opportunités et tout en créant des emplois de qualité dans la transition. Finalement, si nous voulons promouvoir l'industrie européenne et stimuler l'innovation pour nous repositionner sur les marchés mondiaux, la politique de concurrence doit évoluer au rythme de la réalité dans laquelle elle opère. In the past mandate, under the leadership of Margaret Vestager, a lot has been done to make sure that all competition instruments are fit for purpose and aligned with the objectives of the green, digital and resilient European economy. We also count on new instruments to tackle emerging challenges such as the new digital gatekeepers under the Digital Markets Act or the evaluation and response to the distortive effects of foreign subsidies under the Foreign Subsidies Regulation. I will make full use of all these tools so that firms, large and small alike, whether incorporated in big or small member states, have a fair shot at competing in the single market. In a market economy, there is no competitiveness without fair competition. I would add that there is no fair competition without a strong competition policy enforcement. I intend to pursue rigorous competition policy enforcement that is based on values of fairness, openness, entrepreneurship and choice, and that provides equal opportunities for all. But new challenges require us to go further and do better in our approach in our enforcement. If confirmed, I will defend the rigorous enforcement of that competition policy in full respect of the treaties to ensure that competition policy remains as facilitator for the innovation and the competitiveness of European companies. Taking into account contemporary needs and dynamics like globalization, the need to decarbonize and provide sustainability, the impact of the digital transformation, or the compelling demands to innovate and build resilience. Because that is the best way to ensure that competition policy continues to fulfill its original purpose, to protect the level playing field, benefiting citizens in their everyday lives. At the same time, there is a strong demand to simplify and speed up our competition enforcement processes. We need to avoid any delay in the support for the energy transition and the decarbonization of the industry to gain competitiveness, all being done in a high-quality manner. We want to become more attractive and regain investors' appetite for Europe, and this means updating our tools. For instance, acknowledging the relevant role of the pro-competitive approaches in our enforcement, or ensuring that our merger rules capture deals that prevent innovation, in particular for SMEs and mid-caps, the so-called killer acquisitions of companies with low turnover but high innovative and competitive potential. Certainly, this will be one of the more challenging tasks ahead. Same attention should be given to keep our market open to innovation while preventing unfair foreign subsidized investments that may undermine fair competition for European business. During the crisis, we have responded to the needs of people and business. Let's build from the experience. In line with my mission letter, I will provide a new state aid framework to accelerate the rollout of renewable energy, to deploy industrial decarbonization and to ensure sufficient manufacturing capacity of clean tech. This means a simplification of state aid, prioritizing our work on the most distortive aids. I want the state aid assessment process of IPCAs, the important projects of common European interest, to become simpler and faster. I'm also willing to study the proposals being made by some experts and leaders in the European economy for IPCAs so that they could be used for innovation in strategic sectors. By making the most effective use of IPCAs and strengthening their cross-border dimension, we can further deepen the single market and help firms to achieve more scale. We need to move forward with the enforcement of the Digital Markets Act and coordinate with other jurisdictions to effectively deal with the competitive environment in the digital markets. I will work with the Executive Vice President for Technological Sovereignty, Security and Democracy so to implement the new approach to regulate digital markets, ensuring contestability and fairness complementary to the continued enforcement of competition rules. Working together will be crucial, and staying firm in our duty to preserve fairness and protect consumers' rights is a no-brainer. In all those aspects, I will strive for a stronger global cooperation among competition authorities, making enforcement more effective and efficient while promoting fair competition and market integrity worldwide, not to say with European business and European stakeholders. Valuing the role of the European Parliament, keeping the Parliament informed and ensuring you can contribute to the debate on policy proposals related to competition is certainly one of my most important duties. Thank you so much.
Grazie. Grazie Vicepresidente designata. Iniziamo la prima sessione di domande. Passo la parola a Markus Ferber.
Yeah, thank you very much, Commissioner Designate. Thank you very much for the words you have said on what had happened 2 weeks ago in Valencia. But I think it would have been more appropriate to address that in the Spanish Parliament before you do it here. For the Commissioner, For the Commissioner for Competition, it is key to be independent and impartial and to be perceived as such. Otherwise, your role as a neutral referee can be put into question. So I have two questions around that. Firstly, you have a very broad portfolio, not only competition, but also clean and just transition. How do you intend to resolve any conflict of interest which can arise out of that? And secondly, the European Commission has opened an in-depth investigation in 2021 to assess whether the arbitration award to be paid by Spain following the modification of a renewable electricity support scheme is in line with the EU state aid rules. You have been negotiating that in your capacity as minister. How would you ensure your neutrality when you have to handle this specific case? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question, because this provides me the opportunity to commit and to stress the fact that, of course, I pay much attention to assure that this is a very independent policy based on the check and balance elements that already exist, a professional team within the Commission, the legal service, the chief economist, and the collegiality in taking decisions. But also, of course, the fact that it is a no-brainer. A watchdog on a well-functioning single market requires a rigorous enforcement of the competition policy. In fact, it is very difficult to think of an industrial policy that is not consistent with a strong competition policy, because both are quite complementary. You're also asking about the case in Spain, which is an important case, and as you know, the usual practice is that whenever there is any potential concern on to what extent there may be some interest, the usual way to proceed is to raise the issue to the President of the Commission, so that the President of the Commission decides on someone else in the College of Commissioners to raise a proposal to the College. So this is the way I think that we will need to proceed if there is any type of concern dealing with issues, with process, with files that are coming from Spain, and I've been involved in any type of discussion as being minister.
A little bit more abstract. When investors decide whether to make an investment, they consider the predictability and the stability of the regulatory framework. Investments are significantly more likely when key parameters do not change. The sometimes erratic handling of government decisions in Spain, in particular in the energy and clean tech sector, has greatly undermined trust in Spain as an attractive destination for investments and investors. Yet, you are tasked to be part of a green growth strategy, encouraging businesses to invest in the European Union. Given this track record, do you think you are the right person to do so, really to attract investors to invest in the European Union?
Thanks again for the question, Mr. Ferber. I think that I can say that the macroeconomic data coming from Spain show that Spain is attractive, it's an appealing place to invest. It's true that when I entered in government, I had an issue to solve that came from a previous regulation being adopted in 2013 that had been challenged by the investors, and I tried to do my best so to provide solutions for the original investors, and it helped. So to provide a stable framework that was attractive and appealing for new investment in renewable energy solutions, and it helped. It has boosted in Spain in the recent years, but also to ensure that in the transition away from fossil fuels, in the phase-out of fossil fuels, there were new opportunities linked to clean energy that could be helpful for workers and territories. So I think that this is a good example. Of course, this energy policy in the European Commission will rely on my fellow colleague Dan Jorgensen, and I will work with him so to ensure that we can combine the different competences and functions that we have been missioned to ensure a full coherence with the final decisions that we may need to undertake.
Jonas Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Commissioner designated. First, I have to say that I fully agree with my colleague Marcus Ferber. The Spanish matter must be treated in the Spanish Congress. In any case, your mission letter tasks you to develop a new competition framework inter alia through a review of the major regulation, the simplification and proper enforcement of the state aid rules, and tackling killer acquisition. How will you take on this agenda, and specifically, how will you ensure that in the next 5 years, the goals of competition policy, which is integrity of the single market and consumer protection, will work hand to hand with the need for a competitive European economy and a just transition that leaves no one behind? Furthermore, what will be your guiding principles in enforcing competition rules, including new tools such as the Digital Market Act and foreign subsidies regulation? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for pointing out something that I did not mention, which is very important. Last week there was no plenary sessions in the Congress or the Senate, and this week I'm here because the plenary session in the Senate is this afternoon, so it was difficult for me to be there either today or tomorrow, but I will be there next week, and I think that this will help to clarify many things. But on the question that you have raised, I would say that yes, after stressing the fact that we need to enforce this competition policy, we need to identify how competition policy can help even better the competitiveness of the European industries in a period where we know that we will be building the great solutions for the industry and for the global economies, and we do not want to lag behind. So the decarbonization, the environmental issues and green revolution, the efficiency of the use of the resources of the digital transformation are very much in this point of the agenda. And the combination of the regulation and the single market are going to be key. I think that ensuring a level playing field requires the use of all the tools in the competition policy. But as I said, there is a strong demand to simplify the burdens, to ensure that an update of some of the tools that have been used for years, such as the antitrust or the mergers regulation and guidelines, may help for purpose, and to better target those issues or those files that can create more distortive behaviours and more distortive effects in the economy. The new rules, such as the Foreign Subsidies Regulation or the Digital Markets Act, show that the challenges are being captured by the regulation, but we need to implement how they work. The interdependency and competence between industry and competence is quite important. We cannot think of a well-functioning industry without taking into consideration the competition rules, but neither we can count on a sound industrial policy if we do not take into consideration the main drivers of change that are happening right now. So we will be paying attention to all these issues in our cluster, and of course the stress on my side will be mainly on the competition policy.
Thank you so much. In any case, can you elaborate on the tools at the Commission disposal you will use to fulfill this agenda, and what kind of initiatives do you intend to take? And finally, how will you involve this Parliament hearing? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. I think that we are already in the simplification and speeding up processes, thinking on how I could propose a new state aid framework to accompany the clean industrial deal. I think that the clean industrial deal that we need to issue in the next 100 days, together with Vice President Sejourné and Commissioner Hoekstra, is a good opportunity to identify how the competition policy can be updated to provide this connection, how the projects of common European interest can help in a speedy way assessing the state aid process, or how the antitrust procedural framework can evolve so to ensure its effectiveness, how we can strengthen and better target in the competition enforcement, paying attention to innovators, as I said, so to ensure that they can contest the existing incumbents in the time to come, or how to enclose the enforcement gap in this killer acquisition after the court did his judgment on the attempt being made by Commissioner Vestager that was not supported by the court. I think that providing upfront guidance on how to cut the red tape to enable unproblematic measures and cooperations between companies will be very important. So going through the different existing rules and developing the new tools that you adopted in the last mandate is important. And doing all of that, counting on you in the policy proposal moment, but also later on in the implementation, so to follow up the success will be very important too. Sorry.
Vi prego di rispettare i tempi. Buxade Villalba.
Señora ministra, 2 semanas desde la catástrofe en Valencia en que usted efectivamente se ha escondido de los españoles, lo cual no me sorprende porque su jefe, Pedro Sánchez, ahora ha huido a Azerbaiyán. Sin embargo, no va a quedar impune. Todos los aquí presentes, antes de votar su candidatura, deben saber que usted, como ministra de la que depende la Confederación Hidrográfica del Júcar, las alertas meteorológicas y la gestión de proyectos hidráulicos, es responsable de la tragedia en Valencia. Disponía de la información sobre cauces desbordados en tiempo real y no hizo nada. Conocía el riesgo de inundaciones habituales en esa zona del Levante español y no hizo nada. Nunca ejecutó las obras hidráulicas previstas en el Plan Hidrológico Nacional que habrían evitado las riadas hasta en 16 ayuntamientos. Ha impedido la limpieza de los cauces y dejó de ejecutar el plan de gestión de riesgos inundables en la cuenca hidrográfica del Júcar, en las presas previstas en la Rambla del Pollo. Señora Ribera, si usted es comisaria, ¿va a hacer lo mismo con la Unión Europea? ¿Va a dejar de ejecutar las obras previstas y presupuestadas? ¿Va a prohibir la limpieza de los cauces en los ríos europeos?
Señor Buxadé, le agradezco mucho su interés por Valencia, por las obras hidrológicas, por la seguridad de las zonas inundables, por la alarma en los supuestos en los que se producen esas inundaciones, por la inversión en los servicios públicos y por la ciencia. Creo que no hay nada más peligroso que cuestionar o intentar generar la credibilidad, minar la credibilidad de las instituciones que nos alertan. Y creo que precisamente este triste ejemplo que tenemos por delante es un buen ejemplo de lo que ocurre. Así que mi compromiso es, sí, reforzar los servicios públicos, reforzar la capacidad de observación, reforzar la capacidad de anticipación y prevención de inundaciones, ejecutar aquello que corresponda desde la perspectiva de las políticas europeas y acompañar a los europeos y a los gobiernos nacionales para que esto nos encuentre a todos preparados, reduciendo emisiones, pero fortaleciendo nuestra capacidad de respuesta y anticipación. También, en este caso concreto, con esos programas de resiliencia hídrica que incorpora mi compañera Roswell en el título de su mandato.
Señora Ribera, esto es una copia de la página web de su ministerio. Y es una noticia del año 2004. El titular era, gobernaba también su partido, el Gobierno anuncia la creación de una presa en Cheste para evitar riadas en 16 pueblos, entre ellos Masanasa, Paicorta, Picaña, Catarroja, zonas de alto riesgo de inundación. ¿Lo recuerda? ¿Le suena? Se construirán 2 diques, decía su ministerio, uno en cada barranco que desaguarán el cauce del Pollo para reducir el caudal por el efecto de la laminación del propio embalse. Mire, es escalofriante saber que hace 20 años ustedes ya sabían que esto podía suceder y no han hecho nada. Le repito, ¿en qué se han gastado el dinero de los fondos europeos durante su legislatura? Usted ha sido una de las grandes defensoras de la restauración de los cauces naturales. Pues mire usted, aquí tiene sus consecuencias. No tengo más preguntas que hacerle a usted. Para nosotros no debería sentarse en la comisión, sino en un banquillo. A quien quiero dirigirme ahora es el Partido Popular Europeo. Aquí hay 2 opciones, o están del lado de Teresa Ribera o están del lado de la vida de los españoles. Ustedes verán si también quieren ser cómplices de esto. Sus amigos socialistas son unos demócratas impecables.
I have to say that my main concern for the future is society not being able to assess the real risk, the real threats of climate change and extreme meteorological events. Responsible people in institutions challenging and undermining the credibility of science and knowledge. And yes, we need public resources to be invested in build resilience, also in water resilience. Y fue mala suerte que la crisis se llevara por delante la capacidad de inversión en esos proyectos. La recuperación de esos proyectos desde 2018 nos permite hoy tener licitados muchos de ellos. Su falta de apoyo a los presupuestos hace particularmente complicado poder invertir en servicios públicos. La vocación de recortar impuestos hace particularmente complicado disponer de recursos. Pero creo que Europa ha de seguir comprometida porque, desgraciadamente, la aparición de este tipo de fenómenos va a ser recurrente e intensa y, por tanto, mucho más que palabras, cuando llegan momentos muy duros por no estar preparados o no reaccionar a tiempo, lo que necesitamos es reforzar nuestra preparación, nuestras alertas y generar esas alertas para asegurar que la gente pueda estar protegida. Muchas gracias.
Alexandre Vondra.
Thank you, Madam. As a key figure in phasing out nuclear energy in your home country, you have faced criticism for favouring renewables over nuclear, raising questions about your commitment to technological neutrality. Do you support nuclear energy as an indispensable way to achieve our decarbonisation targets? Beyond SMRs, will you support the development and lifetime extension of large-scale nuclear reactors in the EU? State aid processes are a bottleneck, delaying projects by years. Are you ready to accelerate nuclear state aid approvals by dedicating more resources in DG Comp? And finally, what safeguards you take to secure a level playing field between member states? The current situation when the French taxpayers contribute to Spanish solar and wind programs, while Spanish taxpayers do not support French nuclear projects, is simply not fair.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for this question, which is quite an important question. I think that it is quite important to come back to the basic principles on the energy policy in Europe. I think that we are trying to build a common energy policy, but respecting each member state decision on how to organize its energy mix. And I know that there are member states that have decided to bet hard for energy nuclear. Others have decided to bet hard for renewable energy solutions, and all of them are trying to strive so to get the goals being set by 2030 and 2050 in terms of decarbonization and electrification of the energy systems, and all of them deserve respect. I've tried to do my best, together with the rest of the colleagues, while chairing the Energy Council, to count on electricity market design that provides room for everybody. I know that the European finance counts on different initiatives to fund innovation, also in the case of nuclear solutions, including the program being launched last February on a nuclear industrial alliance to ensure that all the different stakeholders that are willing to work in this field can count on a common platform. And I think that this is important because we need to work together in all of this. However, I have to say that what taxpayers pay at the European level is these investments funds that do deal with innovation, that we deal with new solutions and infrastructures, and not so much how to cover the cost at every electricity market that is paid in each member state by the electricity consumers.
Well, I'm sorry for question, not a single one answered, but I will try from a different corner now. The Commission ambitious target to cut the CO2 emissions seriously harm the competitiveness of energy-intensive industries, in particular the automotive sector. Are you ready to initiate an urgent dialogue with the automotive industry to keep production in the EU competitive? Are you willing to speed up a review process for 2035 targets to guarantee a real technological neutrality approach? And finally, will you take an urgent legal action to avoid the harmful penalties designed already for 2025?
Thank you so much for your question, because you point on something which is quite sensitive. The car industry is a great industry in Europe. It is a very relevant part of our GDP. It's a very relevant player in terms of innovation. We all count on mobility, and we know that it is important that the car industry is competitive in global markets. I think that providing this stable signal in terms of what we are expecting from the car emissions in terms of the share of the decarbonization of the economy is key. But I think that we need to work together with the different industrial players so to ensure that the transformation that ensures this competitiveness is being achieved. So keeping and opening this dialogue with the different sectors and stakeholders dealing with infrastructure, with the technologies, with the decarbonization of the product that they are offering to the market will be a very important task. My intention is to work with Commissioner Hoekstra to deal with this issue, but not only him. We have a commissioner dealing with transport and infrastructures. We have a commissioner dealing with finance so that we can count on the capacity to finance this transformation. And we need to develop this clean industrial deal together with Vice President Sejourné. So, yes, we need to count on this neutral approach, but at the same time we need to bet on how to transform our car industry to ensure that they are as competitive as they have been for decades and as important in industrial terms as they have been for decades.
Pascal Canfin.
Madame la commissaire désignée, bienvenue au Parlement européen. Je voulais vous poser une question sur l'adaptation au changement climatique et dire à quel point il est particulièrement choquant de voir que mon collègue de Vox peut parler pendant 2 minutes des événements à Valence sans mentionner une seule fois, le mot changement climatique. Et qu'il se bat par ailleurs contre toutes les politiques que nous essayons de mener ici au Parlement européen pour justement limiter les impacts négatifs du changement climatique. Et donc ma question, c'est qu'après les événements de Valence, qui viennent prendre la suite de tellement d'événements en Europe, qu'est-ce que vous allez faire? Qu'est-ce que vous allez faire concrètement pour renforcer les politiques d'adaptation, de résilience, de prévention sur le changement climatique et ses conséquences? Le Green Deal, le Pacte vert, c'est 95% de réduction des émissions. C'est trop peu d'attention sur les enjeux d'adaptation. Après les événements dramatiques de Valence, ça doit changer.
Thank you so much for your question, Pascal. C'est très important parce que c'est vrai que quand on regarde quels sont les risques pour l'Europe, on se rend compte qu'on n'est pas préparé. The risk assessment report being issued by the European Environmental Agency last spring showed that even if we have done lots of things at the European level, we are still far away from what we need. So building resilience will be very important. And this means taking into consideration the adaptation plan and the assessment, the review of the European adaptation plan, so to concentrate on those aspects, those policies that may help to any local authority, including, of course, national governments, to take the right decisions. Water stress is very important. Flooding is very important. The quality of the soil, because of the combination of different environmental or changes in the use of the soil, will be very important under the additional threat of higher temperatures in a vast part of Europe. So I think that if we need to ensure food security, a well-functioning economy, access to fresh water for any economic or human use, will be key to develop these capacities. My engagement, together with Commissioner Hoekstra, is to develop and to ensure this European adaptation plan so that we can think, we can eventually assess, as I have heard some of you have already suggested, on the possibility to introduce some regulation to this point. But let's not trick ourselves. I think that we may need different approaches, different sectors, different responses at different realities. In any case, early warning, capacity to assess, and early response will always be a key element in the type of elements, in the type of policies that we need to put in place.
Merci. Je voulais poser une question sur l'industrie automobile. Le groupe Renew soutient les objectifs que nous avons voté et les différentes prises de parole dans ces auditions tendent à penser que la Commission est sur cette ligne et nous nous en félicitons. Néanmoins, nous savons que pour certains sous-traitants de l'industrie automobile, il y aura des difficultés sociales et elles sont en train d'arriver. Le Parlement s'est beaucoup battu pour avoir un fonds de transition juste dédié pour les sous-traitants des industries automobiles. Est-ce que vous pouvez vous engager, puisque vous êtes en charge de la transition juste, est-ce que vous pouvez vous engager dans les discussions budgétaires à venir à soutenir cette demande du Parlement qui figure dans le texte sur les standards CO2 des voitures, mais qui peut toujours malheureusement se perdre dans les négociations budgétaires? Pouvons-vous compter sur votre soutien affiché aujourd'hui?
Merci pour la question. Et comme je le disais, je pense que c'est très important d'assurer que l'industrie de l'automobile et toute la chaîne industrielle qui est derrière et l'innovation peut bien fonctionner en Europe. Et pour ça, il faut travailler avec eux. Il faut assurer qu'il y a un level playing field qui ne compte pas avec des investissements et qui vient d'ailleurs et avec des subsidies qui cassent ce level playing field. Mais en même temps, c'est aussi sûr que dans cette transformation, il est très important de réfléchir sur l'impact pour les travailleurs. Et je ne peux pas m'engager sur un sujet concret, mais je peux m'engager à faire mon mieux pour assurer que la transition soit juste aussi dans le domaine de l'automobile et de voir comment on peut faire avec les différents instruments financiers dans le contexte de la discussion budgétaire et des multi-annual financial framework to ensure that there will be solutions for workers in this sector and that we can deal with these issues in due time to avoid additional burdens, additional harm.
Rasmus Andriessen.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ribera, for attending the committee. I think it's good to have you here. High food, energy or housing prices hit ordinary citizens in Europe hard, and the cost of living crisis, I think, is one of the major challenges we are facing. Market concentration and price agreements from big corporations are part of the problem, and they are hurting our citizens. And one example for this, companies coordinating price hikes to increase their profit margin is the sweets industry, where big corporations already had to pay fines of illegal price agreements and information sharing. I would like you, with the responsibility for competition policy, if you can commit to an assessment of unfair pricing for key sectors like food, including an analysis of all approved mergers over the past 10 or 20 years in those sectors and their impact on market concentration, and also, if there are, my assessment is true, also to act with a framework for enforcement on this.
Thank you so much for the question. And no, thank you so much for your question. Yes, I think that food and energy are goods very important for anyone, for any consumer. And of course, the evolution of prices, the spike in energy prices in the previous year has such a terrible impact in the households, in the families, SMEs, but particularly in the families when dealing with food. And I think that it is a question that cannot only be solved through the competition policies. In many occasions, it is connected to other regulatory requirements or to behaviors that are connected to other type of evolution in the markets. But I think that, yes, competition policy and competition tools have to pay attention to any potential behavior that can create additional problems or that can be behind this evolution in profits for companies and not so much for consumers. There has been some experiences in some of the fields that are sensitive for consumers, such as in pharma or food, and not so much in the energy field or in the role that traders in the energy field can play to explain why prices have a certain evolution. So my commitment here is to pay much attention on what it is happening at every single moment, so to be observing how these markets may be evolving, if there are behaviors coming from companies that can explain why this happens, and to assess and learn and to issue around conclusions and recommendations, including guidelines to ensure that we can protect consumers. And at the same time, to make full use of the funds and policies within reach to ensure the protection of consumers, and very much in particular the vulnerable consumers. In the case of the energy, there is a statement in the mission letter of one of my colleagues to address the energy poverty, and I think that this is going to be a very important issue. So having an eye on how the market is functioning, and at the same time addressing the issue of energy poverty in particular for those groups that are particularly vulnerable.
Good to hear that you will prioritize this. So I would like to specify a little bit on the context and where I think there is also a possibility to address this in the field of competition, and this is about Article 102 in the treaties, which actually gives the Commission the ability to act in questions like this. So my follow-up questions goes on specific measures linked to Article 102 and to the enforcement part. So maybe you could also come with a remark on if you would be willing to explore on, for example, also how Article 102 could apply to price increases in the context of bottlenecks, and also there on if you would be willing to do also guidelines on the enforcement, especially linked to the Article 102.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. You know that there is an ongoing process to assess to what extent we can improve our guidelines to avoid exclusionary abuses. But yes, it is probably important to think about the possibility to develop and update the guidelines on exploitative abuses, so to avoid a direct impact on consumers, not only on how competitors may be taking positions or may be behaving in such a way that they exclude, they abuse against some other competitors, but also how, through these abusive clauses, there may be a direct impact on consumers. Under Article 102 of the treaty, there is much that can be done, and I think that being sure that it is also focused on the impact of consumers is part of the traditional purpose, goal of the services and the DG competition and the competition policy, but much more focus may be required, as we are seeing in new products, new services, dealing to digital, but also dealing with energy or food.
Martin Schirdenwan.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Ribera. Ich habe Ihnen sehr aufmerksam zugehört, vor allem bei Ihren Ausführungen zum Wettbewerbsrecht, auch zu staatlicher Beihilfe. Und ich würde gern eine sehr konkrete Frage an dieser Stelle stellen. Wir haben es ja mit einer massiven Housing-Krise in Europa zu tun. Es fehlt an bezahlbarem Wohnraum, und dazu hat unter anderem auch das europäische Beihilferecht beigetragen. Seitdem es in Kraft ist der soziale Wohnungsbau in allen Mitgliedstaaten zurückgegangen. Der private Markt kann das natürlich nicht abfedern. In der Stadt, aus der ich komme, in Berlin, haben ungefähr 60% der Haushalte eigentlich Anrecht auf soziale Wohnraumförderung. Das kriegt natürlich nur ein Bruchteil. Deswegen meine Frage an Sie ganz konkret: Welche Maßnahmen Sie als Vizepräsidentin der Kommission denn ergreifen möchten, um die Wohnungskrise zu bekämpfen. Das heißt speziell, welche Maßnahmen beim Beihilferecht Sie ergreifen möchten, wie das geändert werden muss, damit wir ausreichend bezahlbaren und sozialen Wohnraum in Europa haben.
Thank you for your question. I think that this is going to be one of those very important new challenges in this mandate. There is this generalized concern on the difficulties for the youth, but not only, to ensure access to affordable housing in every part in Europe. And I could say that we need to combine different policies. We need to combine the responsibilities of Madame Minsato with the responsibilities of Mr. Jorgensen and of course, the competition approach. There is the option of counting on the support of the national governments to provide access to affordable houses or the direct help to consumers. But I think that it is still important to think to what extent we can expand this identification of an update in the state aid guidance on the use of state aid for access to housing. And at the same time, I think that we need to work with local and national authorities. At the end, ensuring affordable access to housing to everybody is not going to be something that we can do only from Europe. We can help, we can do much more of what we have done up to now, but it would be very difficult to do it on our own. So I think that this is probably one of the most appealing and important policies to kick off in this mandate. And I honestly think it will be very important to deliver, and to deliver in due time. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Antwort. Ich würde dann gerne noch mal nachhaken an der Stelle, weil es mir doch erscheint, dass wir über eine grundlegende Reform des Beihilferechts eigentlich zu diskutieren haben und damit dann auch natürlich das Wettbewerbsrecht. Ich stimme da komplett überein, dass wir investieren müssen, natürlich massiv, und dass sozusagen auch öffentliche Unterstützung private, gewinnorientierte Unternehmen stattzufinden hat. Aber da gibt es ja Beispiele wie zum Beispiel den Inflation Reduction Act, wo diese Unterstützung an klare Bedingungen, soziale Bedingungen, ökologische Bedingungen gekoppelt ist, also zum Beispiel Mitbestimmungsrechte, gute Löhne, die Schaffung von Ausbildungsplätzen. Ich finde, dass zum Beispiel staatliche Unterstützung oder Investitionen öffentlicher Art auch daran gekoppelt sein müssen, dass es eben keine Dividendenausschüttung geben darf oder Bonizahlungen an Aktionäre oder Topmanager. Und drittens denke ich, dass staatliche Förderung auch daran gekoppelt sein muss, dass die wirtschaftliche Aktivität nicht in Steueroasen stattfindet, damit dort kein Steuerraub an der Gesellschaft vollzogen wird mit Unterstützung öffentlicher Mittel. Wie stehen Sie denn zu diesen Reformmaßnahmen, die, glaube ich, sehr sinnvoll wären, wenn ums Beihilferecht und Wettbewerbsrecht diskutiert wird?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I think that this is a very broad issue. We've been also talking about the use of the Social Climate Fund to ensure the improvements, the retrofitting of housing to allow much more isolated homes, very much in particular for vulnerable families, dealing with energy efficiency. We have talked about thinking of how we can inspire social and environmental conditions when tackling state aid proposals coming from different member states. In principle, when thinking about competition policies, we're thinking about the treaty and the regulations. But it is also true that opening this conversation, this dialogue, to what extent the state aid proposals are fit for purpose, so to cover a market failure through this public funding, can also be tracked in such a way that we can learn and we can ensure that we are consistent when accepting, when supporting, and when using public funding for this type of purposes. So something still to be written and to be adopted, but something where I take your recommendations and comments, because I think it is one of those questions that could be demanded by the public opinion. Thank you.
Grazie. Ultimo intervento, Anja Ant.
Sehr geehrte Frau Ribera, der CO2-Anteil in der Luft beträgt nur 0,04%. Davon stammen jedoch nur 4% von Menschen. Das sind 0,002% CO2, weil der Rest aus der Natur stammt. Die Menschen in der EU verursachen davon etwa 7%. Es geht in der gesamten EU-Klimapolitik also um einen Anteil von 0,0001% CO2. Selbst wenn die EU diesen auf Null reduziert, wird das keinerlei Einfluss auf das Klima haben. Trotzdem betreibt die EU Panikmache zerstört unsere Industrie und Arbeitsplätze, unsere Mobilität und unsere Heizungssysteme. Die Menschen werden für nichts in die Armut getrieben. Können Sie uns vom ESN bitte den Beweis nennen, dass 0,0001% weniger CO2 einen großen Unterschied machen und das Klima retten? Ich bitte Sie um eine genaue Quelle zum Nachlesen.
Well, I appreciate your comment, but maybe not because I agree with you, because I deeply disagree with your comment, but because it is useful to stress something that I said before. The most worrying concern for me, for my children, my grandchildren, the people of my generation, is denying the impact of climate change in our lives, in our expectations on prosperity, and our expectations on the economy. The data is terrifying. We have overpassed 1.5 degrees in 2024, as Copernicus stated last week. The Gulf Current, the North Atlantic stream, is near the collapse, and that could create very difficult circumstances for Northern Europe. And we are unfortunately seeing more and more extreme events in our continent, not to say what it is happening in other continents. So I think that we all need to decarbonize. And we in Europe have the capacities, the tools, the human resources, the intellectual capacities to do many things and to create prosperity through this transformation, including to ensure the competitiveness of our industry. But the fact is that we need to do it taking into consideration the distributional impacts of the change. The change in such a short period of time may have a social impact, so we need to combine the update of the industry and the reduction of inequalities. And I think that all of us as members of public institutions should be united in the identification of the proposals that can help us to do it in a fair, smartest and quick way. Thank you.
Frau Ribera, also den Beweis haben Sie jetzt nicht angetreten. Ich habe jetzt noch eine Frage. Die konservative Partei in Alberta in Kanada hat beschlossen, CO2 nicht mehr als Schadstoff zu betrachten, sondern als grundlegenden Nährstoff für das Leben auf der Erde. Er fördert das Wachstum von Pflanzen. Deshalb ist die Hetzjagd auf CO2 absurd. Warmzeiten hat es auch schon vor der Industrialisierung gegeben. Wie konnte es denn früher wärmer werden? Durch Schwankungen der Sonnenaktivität, durch die Milankovitch-Zyklen, die die Position der Erde relativ zur Sonne ändern und weitere natürliche Ursachen. Keiner kann messen, welchen Anteil heute natürliche Ursachen auf die Erderwärmung haben und welchen Effekt die 0,0001% CO2 der EU daran haben. Die Klimamodelle sind kein Beweis, das ist Konsens in der Wissenschaft. Die Modelle täuschen eine Katastrophe vor. Denken Sie, dass es gerechtfertigt ist, für eine Reduzierung der 0,0001% CO2 die Lebensgrundlagen der Menschen in der EU zu zerstören? Ich finde es unmöglich, wie laut das hier war. Das ist nicht demokratisch. Pfui.
Non, pardon, c'est absolument démocratique que tout le monde ait 1 minute et que ces 1 minute soient respectées par tout le monde. La démocratie, c'est faire en sorte que tous les groupes politiques aient le même temps de parole, à vous après de les respecter. Et ce sera bon pour les autres groupes après, pour les autres speakers après. Ça s'appelle la justice, ça s'appelle l'équité.
Prego, commissaria. Avevo fatto una premessa all'inizio che era quella di mantenere i toni bassi e di rispettare i tempi. L'abbiamo fatto fino a poco tempo fa. Proseguiamo nel rispettare i tempi e nel tenere i toni bassi. Prego, commissaria, per la replica.
I will always be polite to all of you because I think it is my duty, it's the duty of every single citizen. But I honestly think that it is not worth it to waste time on discussing things that are proven and that are assessed by people that know much more than us. The problem is sufficiently big to concentrate our efforts to find solutions, not to deny the reality or the science.
Okay, let's move to the second round of questions. Dear members of the European Parliament, it will be 1 minute for the question, 2 minutes for the answer. As you know, I'll be very strict on the respect of the timing. You know that, for sure. You're kind of used to it right now. It's my, I think it's a 7th hearing that I chair, okay? So now I give the floor to Dolores Montserrat from EPP, and my apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Ms. Montserrat for EPP. 1 minute.
Señora ministra, el campo español la considera su principal enemiga. Ha arruinado a ganaderos y agricultores. La industria, la energía, la automoción denuncian su radicalismo. Su gestión es una larga lista de imposiciones sin diálogo. Pero déjeme decirle una cosa. Este examen es ya totalmente innecesario. Hace 15 días se enfrentó al examen de su vida en Valencia. Como actual ministra de Clima, ha suspendido. A usted le correspondía haber evitado la tragedia, porque usted es responsable de la prevención, preparación y respuesta de los desastres climáticos. Es responsable de las inversiones en la gestión de los ríos, de la prevención de inundaciones y de las alertas climáticas. Hoy no debería estar compareciendo aquí, debería haber comparecido ya en el Parlamento español ante sus conciudadanos. Pero ha preferido estar escondida para salvar su sillón europeo. Y por eso estoy segura de que la historia y quizás también los jueces la juzgarán por su inacción y su incompetencia. Contésteme, señora Ribera, ¿se compromete usted a dimitir si se ve involucrada judicialmente para no arrastrar al descrédito a la presidenta von der Leyen y a todo el colegio de comisarios?
Thank you so much, Mrs. Montserrat, because this allows me to explain the different responsibilities in a decentralized country as it can happen in Germany. We, the national government, have the responsibility to issue the meteorological warnings and to follow the water data in real time and to provide the means that are requested by the regional governments. As in other decentralized states in Europe, the regional government is the one in charge of generating the alerts to the general public and to adopt the measures to protect the people. The warnings were issued at due time. In fact, there were many institutions that, according to those warnings in the previous days, at 7:30 in the morning in the 29th, decided to cancel all the activity, as the University of Valencia, as the local authorities in many towns. That was not the case for some other local institutions. And I think, as I said before, that there will be time to come back to this, and I will go to the Congress next week in Madrid. But it could be good to think on how undermining the credibility of the meteorological agency, not taking seriously the risk warnings that were sent, may have catastrophic consequences for the people. So we need to strengthen our response. Pero siendo muy serios con respecto a la capacidad de combinar mejor y entender mejor el riesgo en cada momento. Y el riesgo de grandes inundaciones se resuelve en muy poco tiempo, solamente cuando se toma en serio la señal, la alerta meteorológica, que en este caso era una alerta roja con arreglo a Meteo Alert, un sistema estandarizado a nivel europeo que recomienda que todo el mundo se quede en casa, que se corte la movilidad y se generen las alertas a la población civil.
Thank you. Now we'll give the floor to Timo Völken for the SND.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner Designate, we can surely all agree, okay, maybe everyone in this room except colleague Arndt, who obviously cannot read the IPCC report, that we have to adapt quickly to the climate crisis, as disasters driven and enhanced by the climate crisis are hitting European citizens ever more frequently and ever more horrifically. Given that urgency, what will be the concrete actions taken under the European Climate Adaptation Plan? In your written answers, you refer to the protection of critical infrastructure and natural capital inputs. What other assets do you intend to protect? How will you combine these efforts with the need to restore Europe's ecosystems and increase their resilience to climate change effects? What actions will you take under the announced Water Resilience Initiative? And finally, by which legislative means do you intend to achieve these goals, and how will you mobilize the necessary additional financial resources?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. I think that my role in this field is to work to support Commissioner Roswell in charge of the environmental functions, environmental responsibilities and the water resilience, but not only. Commissioner Hoekstra, dealing with climate policy, is also very important. And beyond that, it is also true that there may affections in other relevant fields, such as critical infrastructure, including energy infrastructure, or mobility infrastructure. I think that what we need to do, or food security. The agriculture policy is also important, as stated also in the report being issued by Professor Stroll-Schneider. I think that it is important to take this overview, comprehensive understanding on the impact of climate change in different aspects of our social and economic life. And I think it is important that we mainstream this concern in every single policy. But as I said, we have the opportunity under the review of the European Adaptation Plan to introduce the reference and the recommendations being issued by this report on the climate risk assessment being issued by the European Environment Agency last February. So I think that we will need to work a lot. And I think that this is an exercise that is not only part of members of the Commission and the staff in the different directors generals, but also the members of the Parliament and the different stakeholders. I think that ensuring that there is a proper ownership by the different constituencies is going to be very important. At the end, we may decide to introduce this reference in a concrete regulation or to adopt a strategy covering different measures. But I think that having the capacity to identify what, how and when will be very important, as well as when thinking about the funding through the different existing funds or in the discussion of the budget to come.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Christine Schneider for EPP.
Yes, thank you so much, Mrs. Ribera. The difference between dealing with the flood in Spain and Germany at the beginning is that in Germany the responsible environment ministry has returned. That's the beginning remark. But now I want to have a question about your written answers about the question. You said that you are characterized as a person who engages in dialogue, who seeks consensus and who builds bridges. Mrs. Ribera, on the 10th May 2024, in an interview, you accused Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen of having caused, and I quote, enormous damage on European interests by making the cap more flexible as farmers demand. Furthermore, you also lashed out European farmers themselves, accusing them of lying when they protest about the excesses of the Green Deal. Is this the dialogue and the consensus that you mean? Please give me an answer beyond buzzwords how European farmers should trust you when you insult them in public and ignore them.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I don't ignore anyone, less than that, the farmers. I think that the farmers are facing different difficult challenges, very difficult challenges, including water stress or soil quality, or the combination of different requirements in a loss of quality in the ecosystems where they develop their lives, or the social services that they need in order to fulfill their needs there where they may live. This is why I think that the exercise being led by Professor Strohschneider is so important. And it is so important that he managed to get a very broad consensus around the main premises, principles, and proposals. So my duty in this field is to work with the fellow colleague in charge of agriculture, Commissioner Hansen, so to ensure that we can combine the different responsibilities in our portfolios and in my cluster. But as I said, I think that the most important aspect is to ensure that this dialogue takes place and that the capacity to share the identification of problems and the acceptability of the proposals, of the responses, is met.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Silvia Sardone for PFE.
Gli elettori negli Stati Uniti con Trump e in Europa con le recenti elezioni hanno respinto la vostra ideologia ambientalista talebana. Il Green Deal che avete ideato è una vera e propria follia, a partire dall'auto elettrica, che si sta dimostrando un fallimento per i produttori e i consumatori. Gli industriali di tutta Europa denunciano regole e vincoli green che li penalizzano pesantemente. Possiamo dire che la vostra strategia è tutt'altro che lungimirante, che porterete l'Europa verso la deindustrializzazione e che la Cina festeggia le vostre scelte? Ha oramai il monopolio nelle materie prime e un vantaggio competitivo immenso sulle batterie elettriche e sui pannelli solari. Pensate di rivedere il Green Deal? Lei pensa di rivederlo, o almeno anche in una sua piccola parte? O ci vuole condurre verso un autentico suicidio economico di tutta l'Europa? Infine, sulle telecomunicazioni, ha intenzione di favorire o ostacolare il consolidamento del settore e in che modo? Grazie. Ho usato meno di un minuto, così non avete potuto interrompermi.
Gracias por la pregunta y gracias por la intensidad en el minuto que tiene. Necesita ahora muchas respuestas y las que no podamos abordar hoy seguro que las abordaremos de cara al futuro. Yo creo que tenemos un marco verde que nos puede orientar muchas decisiones importantes desde el punto de vista económico, social y ambiental. Pienso que negar la importancia o la dificultad del problema no facilita las cosas. Creo que debemos mantenernos firmes con respecto a ese acuerdo, con respecto a esa visión de conjunto ya establecida, pero sin embargo tenemos que ser enormemente flexibles, abiertos, tolerantes y generar los consensos para hacer posible ese recorrido generando las oportunidades. Decía en mi introducción que el mundo no va a esperarnos. Creo que los grandes dilemas de competitividad industrial en este momento no están en si la industria ha de ser más eficiente en el uso de recursos o si debe firmar acuerdos, partenariados, alianzas con terceros países donde puedan existir esas commodities, sino en hacerlo de manera inteligente para que la gente pueda disfrutarlos y aprovecharlos y reducir sus facturas, pero también generar oportunidades de empleo e innovación. Y a eso sí me comprometo y lo hago con mucho gusto. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Nicola Procaccini for ECR.
Buonasera. Lo scorso anno è stato raggiunto il picco massimo di emissioni di CO2 nel mondo, nonostante le emissioni nell'intera Unione Europea siano scese a meno dell'8% del totale. Alla luce di questo dato, non pensa che la nostra priorità dovrebbe essere la resilienza dei territori di fronte ai fenomeni meteorologici causati dal riscaldamento globale? A proposito del suo ruolo da Ministro, come giustifica il fatto che la Spagna è diventata leader nell'importazione di gas dalla Russia? Dal 2022 ad oggi ha dato a Putin quasi 8 miliardi di euro, 6 volte e mezzo più degli aiuti dati all'Ucraina. Infine, come valuta il lavoro del suo predecessore Timmermans e se ritiene che sia stato apprezzato dai cittadini europei? Grazie.
Thank you so much for your questions. I will try to reply to the first two questions. I'm not going to comment of my fellow colleague Franz Timmermans, who did his best to do things, and probably we still need to learn how to do better. I think that, yes, last year the CO2 emissions went up once again. And I think that this is quite a concern. We need to break this tendency and to go down with CO2 emissions globally, and we need to honor our commitment to fulfill a decarbonized European economy by 2050. We have time, but not so much, and we need to do many things in a very short period of time in many different sectors. I think that this goes well with the other very important priority, which is to ensure that our different territories are ready for the climate impacts that we are already suffering. You come from a country, Italy, that, like mine, Spain, suffers wildfires, suffers droughts, suffers from flooding. And I think that this means that we need to accommodate to this new reality. We need to fight against this new reality. And probably we may get some inspiration coming from nature to be much more resilient in the type of response that we can develop. But as I said before, we also need to concentrate in research, observation and attribution of weather events so that we can understand better how this may evolve in the time to come. So we need the two things, reducing emissions, but also developing and deepening our policies dealing with resilience, adaptation and observation. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Stéphanie Youn-Courtin for Renew.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Tout d'abord, pardon de vous décevoir si je ne crie pas ou si je ne prononce ni le mot Trump ou Poutine dans mon intervention. Madame la Commissaire, vice-présidente désignée Ribera, la mise en œuvre effective du DMA sera essentielle pour garantir une concurrence loyale sur les marchés numériques et s'attaquer à l'abus de position dominante des big tech qui contrôlent un grand nombre de plateformes, de services ou de technologies dont nous dépendons. Encore plus à la lumière du résultat des élections américaines. Pourtant, depuis l'entrée en vigueur du DMA, nous avons vu plusieurs cas où les gatekeepers n'ont pas correctement respecté leurs obligations, qui ont, pour Apple, notamment Google et Meta, fait l'objet d'une enquête de la Direction générale concurrence pour non-conformité. Quelles mesures comptez-vous donc prendre pour renforcer l'application de la législation et comment allez-vous vous assurer que la Direction générale concurrence dispose des ressources nécessaires pour faire son travail correctement? D'ailleurs, êtes-vous favorable à l'introduction de frais de surveillance prélevés directement sur les gatekeepers pour accroître les capacités de mise en œuvre? Et enfin, serez-vous bien le nouveau shérif qui veillera à assurer la concurrence à l'ère du numérique en Europe, tout en étant géante verte?
Apologies, 1 minute to respond. I forgot to comment on the LNG question. I think that we are getting rid of Russian fossil fuels, and we still need to do a lot. And I think that this is a free market, and sometimes it is difficult to address this issue for traders. So I think that we need to do much more, and a common decision at the European level could be very helpful. For the time being, we don't still count on the unanimity that we require to take this decision. Dealing with the DMA and how we can ensure that we take the right decisions, I think that we are bound by the existing legal framework, and I think that we need to do our best. The digital world is going very fast, and we need to address the concerns being expressed by users. It can concentrate much power, and we need to pay attention with the existing tools, together with the Commissioner, with the Executive Vice President Birkunen, and the DG Competition Services. And it is true that we still miss much more to deal with this problem, counting on a team that this is sufficiently safe for this purpose. For the time being, what we are doing is counting on a team that combines the efforts of the and the DG dealing with the competition tools. And we also count on the support of the national authorities. But yes, I think that we need to find other means to structurally strengthen the capacity of the Commission to deal with these portfolios. Very much in particular, understanding that this is an issue that goes beyond our borders, beyond Europe. Working with other competition authorities is good, but we need to strengthen our competence. Oh, I couldn't find you anymore, sorry. We need to strengthen our capacities back home. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Nicolás González Casares from the S&D.
Gracias, señora Ribera. Usted es conocida por encontrar soluciones a laberintos en la cumbre del clima, por forjar acuerdos y negociaciones desde una perspectiva europea, centrándose en soluciones europeas también desde el Gobierno de España, una habilidad negociadora que es bien reconocida más allá también de las fronteras de nuestro país. Y creo que esas habilidades van a ser muy necesarias para la próxima Comisión Europea, dado el escenario de alta volatilidad geopolítica que está afectando, entre otras cosas, a la certidumbre de precios en los mercados energéticos. Y dado que no podemos descartar nuevos cisnes negros en el futuro, quiero preguntarle cuál será su papel en la aplicación de los mecanismos para hacer frente a posibles nuevas crisis de precios o para fomentar la flexibilidad de la demanda. Y también si tiene previstas medidas adicionales para hacer más competitivos y transparentes los mercados eléctricos para desacoplar los precios del gas de los de la electricidad, como recomienda el informe Draghi, y para hacer más atractiva la electrificación de la demanda. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Creo que, en efecto, la transformación de nuestro sistema energético está en curso. Creo que la experiencia de la crisis pasada como consecuencia de la invasión de Ucrania por parte de Rusia y la evolución de los mercados energéticos en todo el mundo y en particular en Europa nos ha permitido aprender muchas cosas. También extraer lecciones que serán importantes en la aplicación en los próximos años. Algunas las hemos capturado ya en la modernización, en la regulación que hemos adoptado desde entonces. Otras nos permitirán, decía, extraer lecciones de qué forma todos los marcos extraordinarios, que muchos de ellos incluyen proyectos o procesos que incorporan ayudas de Estado, nos pueden ser útiles de cara a seguir agilizando, acelerando todos los procesos de participación, de implicación de actores públicos y privados en esta transformación. En todo caso, yo creo que es muy importante poder incorporar, desarrollar y aprender de los instrumentos que hemos aprobado recientemente. ¿Qué ocurre con los contratos por diferencias? ¿Qué ocurre con los contratos a medio y largo plazo? ¿De qué manera modernizar nuestras redes? ¿De qué manera garantizar que esas interconexiones todavía pendientes a nivel europeo nos dan mayor garantía de estabilidad y de alternativa en el supuesto de encontrarnos alguna crisis por el camino? ¿O de qué forma las alternativas que nos pueden ofrecer el almacenamiento para compensar las otras soluciones técnicas que existen en muchos de nuestros países da estabilidad y una capacidad de hacer un uso mucho más eficiente e intenso de las redes de las que disponemos? Todo esto lo tendremos que comprobar en estos años, reforzando simultáneamente la gobernanza de nuestros operadores de red, la gobernanza de los operadores del mercado.
Thank you. François-Xavier Bellamy for EPP.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Madame la Commissaire désignée, vous avez parlé de ceux qui fragilisent la confiance dans les institutions, mais qui en est vraiment responsable? Dans son dernier rapport sur l'état de droit en Espagne, la Commission européenne s'est inquiétée des attaques qui se multiplient de la part du gouvernement contre la magistrature en Espagne. Et vous-même, le 19 janvier dernier, vous avez attaqué avec vigueur un juge espagnol qui venait de rendre une décision contraire aux intérêts de votre gouvernement. Par ailleurs, le même rapport de la Commission européenne rappelle qu'aujourd'hui, les attaques se multiplient contre des journalistes qui osent critiquer votre gouvernement et que l'indépendance du service public des médias en Espagne est, je cite, en grand danger. Comment pouvons-nous croire que vous respecterez l'état de droit, qui est indispensable à toute bonne politique, à toute politique crédible, lorsque vous avez assumé la responsabilité que ce gouvernement a prise dans la fragilisation terrible de l'état de droit aujourd'hui en Espagne? Et ma question est très simple. Si, puisque vous semblez ne pas vouloir assumer la responsabilité devant la tragédie qui vient d'arriver en Espagne, si vous êtes mis en cause demain par la justice, oui ou non, démissionnerez-vous de votre poste au sein de la Commission européenne?
Une question. Je vais être très claire. Les questions ne commencent pas à 1 minute. Je veux bien laisser 3, 4, 5 secondes de plus quand il y a une question qui a commencé avant. On ne commence pas sa question à 1 minute. Je vous laisse répondre, Madame la Commissaire désignée.
Creo que el Estado de Derecho, las libertades, incluida la libertad de información y de prensa, son valores esenciales del proyecto europeo, también de los Estados miembros de la Unión Europea y también de España, donde se cumple a rajatabla, como bien se puede observar por la variada opinión publicada. Creo que simultáneamente debemos pensar en la forma en la que tenemos la capacidad de desarrollar buena información para entender los problemas de nuestro tiempo. Así que sí, respeto al Estado de Derecho y las leyes, respeto al papel que a cada cual le corresponde desempeñar en las instituciones y respeto a la libertad de prensa y al debate público son reglas esenciales, como también lo es la cortesía parlamentaria y la buena educación. Muchas gracias.
Now I give the floor to Kaite Getoff for the Greens. Sorry if I mispronounced it.
First of all, let me express my solidarity with the victims of the flooding in Valencia. In Spain and elsewhere across Europe, we are witnessing entire communities being swept away, families being displaced, livelihoods being lost. It is clear that we will need massive funding to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Obviously, we need to address this on the European level and find European solutions, and obviously, we need to talk about this here today. Nature-based solutions are not only often more cost-effective than concrete infrastructure projects and promote, for example, food and water security, they actually address the root cause of climate-related disasters. So I'm pleased to hear you set and focus on this in the past. How will you ensure that the upcoming water resilience strategy and climate adaptation plan follow this approach and will not just waste huge amounts of taxpayer money? And will you require member states to reduce each of the risks identified by the European Climate Risk Assessment Report to climate-proof all critical infrastructure and to protect the most affected citizens and workers?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will strive, if confirmed, to work with my fellow colleagues responsible of environment policies and climate policies, and not only. As I say, there may be other impacts dealing with funds, with finance, and with other sectoral policies that may help or difficult proper resilience and adaptation process in our countries. Dealing with water, I think that it is quite interesting and quite important that the water resilience appears connected to the title of one of the commissioners, because water, as it happens in the case of energy or food, is absolutely essential for the welfare of any human being and the economic activity and the food security and the farming and so on. And the changes in land use, the mismanagement of water, the climate impacts, the pollution of water are part of the issues that we need to address. So to preserve water quality and quantity, to enhance the competitive and innovative services that we have been developing in Europe for a very long while, and to address the root causes of water challenges. So yes, I commit myself to support and to work with my fellow colleagues in this issue. Yes, I think that water deserves much more attention. It is not that it has not been part of the European policies for a very long while, but I think that it is increasingly compelling. So this will be one of the priorities for this mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Raúl de la Hoz Quintano for EPP.
Gracias, Presidenta. Señora Ribera, conviene ser fiel a la verdad también aquí, en este Parlamento. Usted ha dicho antes, en respuestas a una pregunta que ha formulado un compañero de mi grupo parlamentario, que la Confederación Hidrográfica del Júcar mandó alertas. La propia Confederación, usted lo sabe, ha manifestado públicamente que no mandó ninguna alerta, alegando que no le competía hacerlo. No conviene mentir, señora Ribera. Pero usted está aquí, además de para demostrarnos su competencia, para demostrarnos su integridad en el cargo. La semana pasada, el Tribunal Supremo de España abría diligencias contra su amigo, compañero de partido, ministro con usted durante 3 años de transporte en el gobierno del señor Sánchez y secretario de organización número 2 de su partido también durante 3 años. Se le imputan a su amigo Ábalos los delitos de tráfico de influencias, cohecho, organización criminal, malversación en relación con la llamada mafia de los hidrocarburos. Sabemos que su ministerio fue una pieza necesaria para que esta mafia pudiera operar. Sabemos que se defraudaron 182 millones. Le hago la pregunta y formulo la pregunta. ¿Se compromete usted a dimitir en el caso de...
No, stop. No. Excuse me. Jusqu'à présent, on a eu des auditions où j'étais relativement stricte sur le temps de parole et tout le monde a à peu près joué le jeu. Là, je vois que ça déborde régulièrement. Je vais vraiment vous demander, par respect pour le Parlement européen, de tenir votre temps de parole et de ne pas commencer vos questions à partir de 1 minute. En fait, quand on a 1 minute 30, ça fait une très très grosse différence. J'arrêterai de faire un rappel à l'ordre quand ce sera respecté, Monsieur Bellamy. Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, je donne la parole à la commissaire désignée.
Thank you so much. I will try to respond in European terms because I think that it matters. First, I insisted since the very beginning, the rule of law is absolutely capital. Second, I always honor the truth. So please be polite. Third, I think that respecting the rules of procedure, but also ensuring that the procedure and the decisions are being taken under the rule of law is very important. And I'm sure that this is the case. So please, if you have any problem, go back to Spain. And yes, the rule of law.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Dario Tamburano for the left, for 1 minute.
Dottoressa Ribera, benvenuta in Commissione ITRE. Vari settori industriali europei come gli energivori e l'automotive sono oggi in una situazione di insufficiente competitività, anche a causa dei costi dell'energia. Inoltre i sussidi pubblici e le politiche industriali ed economiche di lungo termine di Cina e Stati Uniti pongono le nostre imprese in una situazione di svantaggio ancora maggiore. Sono a rischio milioni di posti di lavoro, ma anche la stabilità socio-economica e politica dell'Unione. Nonostante il Green Deal non sia realmente nemmeno iniziato, sono in molti, anche qui dentro stasera, a dare alla decarbonizzazione la responsabilità dell'attuale contingenza e chiedono quindi passi indietro in nome della competitività. Può rispondere a chi chiede questi passi indietro, chiarendo come la decarbonizzazione sarà invece in grado di supportare industria, posti di lavoro e potere di acquisto degli europei e quali sarebbero viceversa secondo lei le conseguenze del non fare, del rallentare la decarbonizzazione in termini di impatto sociale ed economico?
Thank you.
I appreciate very much your question because you stated very well. I think that we have problems of the cost of energy, we have problems of competitiveness in some of our very classical industry. We have a very strong concern on how the car sector can adapt to the existing demands and how we can ensure that the infrastructure ensures that the new models can be bought by consumers at a reasonable price. I think that if we want to be attractive for investments, we need to be stable when taking decisions. We cannot change or we cannot say that we don't know if we want to be green or not to be green. We go forwards or we go backwards. I think that that's not a very smart strategy. What I think it is very, very important is to ensure that once we fix a target, we know how to reach the target, and we develop the pathway to reach that pathway in a very open manner with all the different stakeholders. So my impression is that what we need to do is to deepen the conversation, the capacity to develop a common strategy with the main stakeholders in this sector, paying much attention to the workers. So it is not only the main figures in terms of output or balance, but also what does this mean in terms of the impact for workers or the skills that we may need or the deep transformations that this will require. And I think that this is something that we need to do in any case. There is no way to ensure that the rest of the world will wait for the right moment for Europe to change our industry. We need to ensure that we support our industry to gain the competitiveness that they want to win.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to César Luena for the S&D.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Vicepresidenta, ya ve que Don't Look Up no es solo una película, que de vez en cuando se nos cuelan extras en el Parlamento Europeo. Y claro, esto es un riesgo. Hay que tomárselo muy en serio, no hay que minusvalorarlos, hay que combatirlos como usted hace, con paciencia, con datos y con ciencia. Y es muy importante que sigamos el Pacto Europeo, el Pacto Verde Europeo. ¿Cómo cree usted que tenemos que seguir para cumplir con las estrategias y con los objetivos? Y también para incrementar nuestra presencia y nuestro rol en las cumbres internacionales. Hoy ha empezado ayer la cumbre en Bakú, teniendo en cuenta que en enero tenemos a un inquilino nuevo en la Casa Blanca y que posiblemente deje un espacio. La Unión Europea tiene que ocuparlo con credibilidad y con coherencia. Y le hago una última pregunta sobre la ley de restauración de la naturaleza, porque en 2030 tenemos que conseguir que el 20% de las tierras, de los mares, estén restaurados. ¿Cómo va usted a impulsarlo? Mucha suerte en los próximos 5 años.
Muchas gracias por su pregunta. Creo que las tres cuestiones son relevantes. Primero, el papel de la Unión Europea en los grandes debates internacionales. La cuestión del clima, la cuestión de pérdida de la biodiversidad, no son cuestiones que se puedan restringir a un solo territorio, a un solo continente, a un solo país. Requieren de la cooperación global. Y siendo problemas enormemente complejos, contamos con un marco de gobernanza que permite que todo el mundo esté alrededor de la mesa discutiendo las soluciones. Por eso es importante una COP como la que efectivamente se inició ayer en Azerbaiyán y el año que viene se celebrará en Brasil. Creo que, en todo caso, debemos hacerlo no solamente porque sea importante para el conjunto de la humanidad, es que es importante para nosotros. Es que la industria europea no va a ser competitiva si no introduce estas variables de uso eficiente de los recursos y economía circular, de acceso a materias primas, de autonomía estratégica, pero también de descarbonización del conjunto de la economía y alternativas desde el punto de vista de las soluciones energéticas. Es que nuestros hijos y nuestros nietos no tendrán ocasión ni de tener empleo, ni de tener una economía que funcione bien si no lo hacemos. Les dejaremos una carga mayor y mucha más complejidad en la búsqueda de soluciones. Y creo que esto es con independencia de quién esté en la Casa Blanca. Tendremos que buscar las mejores alianzas, tendremos que trabajar para conseguir que sea quien esté en cualquier capital, en cualquier país de Naciones Unidas, pueda contribuir a su esfuerzo. Lo mismo le digo de la Ley de Restauración de la Naturaleza. Respeto mucho las discusiones que hubo en esta Cámara. Sé que no fue un expediente fácil. Sé que es relevante desde el punto de vista no solamente del cumplimiento de nuestras obligaciones internacionales en materia de biodiversidad, sino también de contar con ecosistemas que provean los servicios que requiere nuestra economía en ámbitos muy diferentes. Y ya no basta con pensar que se puede preservar lo que hay, sino que tenemos que trabajar, ayudar para esa restauración. Por eso creo que desde la Comisión, trabajando con los colegas que trabajan en agricultura, en medio ambiente, en clima, en ocupación, en políticas vinculadas a la ocupación del territorio, se ha de hacer un gran esfuerzo para poder acompañar a los países, a los capitales y a los actores locales.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Jana Nagyova for TFE.
Madam Commissioner Designate, thank you. Nuclear energy is an extremely important part of Europe's energy mix on the pathway to carbon neutrality. Not everywhere does the sun shine like in Spain or wind blows like in the North Sea. But construction of such sources is extremely financially demanding and some form of state aid is inevitable. The notification of state aid for Dukovany, a nuclear power plant in the Czech Republic, including pre-notification phase, took nearly 4 years, ending April 2024. I worked with some decarbonization project for energy-intensive industry where notification took 2 to 4 years due to constantly changing rules in the area of state aid and additionally added questions and requests from the European Commission. But for EU economy to survive, time is crucial. Question, how will you streamline competition policy so it does not create additional market barriers as it does now? And how will you approach state aid notification for the construction of nuclear sources? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. I think that this is one of those issues that has been raised constantly in the last years, how we can speed up and simplify the management, the procedures dealing with state aid. So how we can update the guidelines, so to concentrate our efforts in those aspects that may be more complicated, to simplify and standardize, but at the same time to ensure that competition services do deal with the cases that may be more distortive and facilitate the resolutions in many other cases that could be simple or more obvious. You have been commenting on two particular aspects or sectors that may require to support private decisions in the business community. What to do whenever there is a new development in a nuclear plant, or what to do in energy-intense industry that may require some help in order to decarbonize and to go along the strategy. I think that the first comment I could say is that first, I'm not in charge. I don't know the particular cases. In case I am confirmed as Vice President, I may know the case, but it is not so clear that I can come in. But what it is important is that we take into consideration that each single case should be assessed in a case-based ground, so to identify where there may be the problems and how to solve these concrete problems. But as I said, my impression is that drawing lessons from the past and coming up with new guidelines on state aid may help to identify where we need to concentrate the efforts and where we can understand that things could be much easier, because the recent experience knows or shows where the things are being much more common or frequently solved in a similar manner.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Denis Neshi for ECR.
Grazie Presidente. Vicepresidente esecutivo designato, le farò delle domande secche. Condivide l'architettura complessiva del Collegio dei Commissari, così come è stata presentata dalla Presidente eletta von der Leyen? Lei ha un grandissimo portafoglio e anche la vicepresidenza esecutiva. Qualche collega ha, anche qualche istante fa, messo in dubbio la sua adeguatezza rispetto a tale ruolo. Secondo lei, all'Italia, che è un grande paese, nonché la seconda manifattura in Europa, spetta una vicepresidenza esecutiva? E secondo lei, nello specifico, Raffaele Fitto merita la vicepresidenza esecutiva? Vicepresidente esecutivo designato, mi aspetto delle risposte secche, sì o no? Grazie.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Respeto las decisiones que se adopten en cualquiera de los gobiernos de los 27 Estados miembros. Respeto y defiendo el principio de colegialidad en el trabajo de la Comisión y no le quepa la menor duda que, en el caso de ser confirmada, trabajaré con el resto de mis compañeros para garantizar la coherencia y la eficacia de las decisiones de la Comisión.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Christophe Grudler for Renew.
Merci, Madame Ribera. Deux questions. Compétitivité, tout d'abord. Comment voulez-vous adapter la politique de concurrence pour favoriser l'émergence de champions industriels européens capables de prospérer à l'international, tout en évitant la concentration excessive, les risques de monopole et les distorsions de concurrence au sein de notre marché intérieur? C'est clairement urgent pour la défense, l'espace, les technologies, l'industrie lourde, à l'heure où l'Europe fait face à une fragmentation et une concurrence internationale intense. Deuxièmement, je reviens sur la neutralité technologique et le financement. Question de notre collègue Vondra, à laquelle vous n'avez pas répondu. La neutralité technologique est inscrite dans les traités européens et défendue par Ursula von der Leyen. Pouvez-vous nous dire clairement, êtes-vous oui ou non favorable à des mécanismes de soutien identiques pour les renouvelables et pour le nucléaire?
Merci pour les deux questions. Je pense que quand on parle de la loi de la concurrence et la capacité d'améliorer le fonctionnement du marché intérieur, il y a au moins 3 références dans les récentes littératures en Europe qui comptent Draghi, l'État et Christine Lagarde. Je pense que tous les 3 sont importants parce que c'est vrai qu'on doit développer encore plus notre marché intérieur, qu'on doit prendre compte qu'il faut travailler sur la compétitivité et les droits de la concurrence parce que c'est la manière d'assurer des meilleurs prix, de la capacité d'innovation des compagnies, mais aussi des marchés qui attirent pour aller plus loin et au-delà de la situation d'aujourd'hui. Et en même temps, on doit développer des infrastructures, des connexions et des cadres en commun en toute l'Europe. En même temps, on sait bien qu'on a besoin de réfléchir sur quel est le marché relevant. Et parfois, on a l'impression que si on parle des champignons européens, mais on ne parle pas de la fermentation dans les marchés intérieurs, on peut peut-être réduire la concurrence entre des acteurs qui sont installés dans une portion du marché européen, mais pas dans tous les marchés des 27. Alors, oui, il faut combiner les deux approches, l'approche marché intérieur et l'approche concurrence. Travailler pour une concurrence et pour des champions qui sont beaucoup plus capables dans le marché international et à coste de la concurrence dans les domestiques n'est pas une bonne solution. Alors, il faudra voir à quel point les nouvelles demandes, l'espace, l'industrie décarbonée, la défense peut compter sur les différents mécanismes. Et en même temps, il faut...
Merci. Je donne maintenant la parole à Aura Salah pour le PPE.
Merci. Experience pays off. While your predecessor was familiar with the challenges of competition policy, your background is mainly in environmental and climate issues. In addition to your competence, you have to prove us today your integrity beyond a doubt. Do you commit to resigning if information were to come to light, proving that you or members of your ministry in Spain were in contact with the members of the mafia? Or that some members of your ministry acted to benefit the mafia in cooperation with the accused minister? Would you accept your responsibility for having accepted the operation of the company responsible for the fraud? Thank you.
So on funding nuclear, because I saw that the other day you were asking to Dan Jorgensen, and I think that he provided a very wise response to that fact. And the essence is that the type of state aid is not the same when we are thinking about big plants or when we are thinking on how to incentivize small investments in renewables. So the cases are different, but I think that this is already clear in the existing framework dealing with energy and the decarbonation of the whole energy system in Europe. So let's see. There are things that are ongoing, and let's see how we can combine all these different references in the existing policies and the existing fundings, including the Innovation Fund and the Industrial Alliance or the IPCI dealing with equipments. On your question, I come back to the rule of law. So please do respect the courts and do respect the institutions. But I can tell you that, of course, I have nothing to do with these references. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to René Repasi for the SND.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Ms. Ribera, over here. Returning to the subject matter of your portfolio, which is, amongst others, competition. Citizens currently are facing massive accumulation of private power that you will have to deal with. In my eyes, competition law has to address accumulation of private power rather than only its excesses. It has to address market structure rather than its behaviors. A tool to achieve this objective is the new competition tool as it was proposed to Draghi and not totally unknown to the Commission services. Will you support the introduction of the new competition tool in order to address structural competition issues? Do you intend to make use of structural remedies, something your predecessor was unfortunately shying away? And moreover, you were mentioning killer acquisitions and the reform of the merger regulation, necessary after the Illumnia Grail case. Can you commit to change the merger regulation in order to properly and adequately address harmful acquisitions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, which I think is very interesting, and I think that we'll need to come back to assess to what extent we need a new tool, because the existing tools do not provide sufficient ways to respond, or to what extent the existing tools can provide the right answers to those problems. And I think that you have also mentioned two things that are very important, the structural remedies And to a certain extent, my reading is that there is an attempt in the existing Digital Markets Act and the designation of gatekeepers to introduce this type of approach, and the killer acquisitions, where we are missing a structural solution. For the time being, once the court declared against the approach being supported by the DG Competition in the Illumina Grade case, we are working with the national authorities that count on this competence in their national legislation. But I think that we will need to think further how we can improve this solution, so to count on a structural response.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Fulvio Martuscello for EPP.
Sì. Io ho l'impressione che lei sia venuto qui un po' a fare la vittima. Tutti quelli che mi criticano lo fanno per motivi politici, questa è stata la sua idea, ma non è così. Questo Parlamento è seriamente preoccupato, è preoccupato della sua inesperienza nel tema della concorrenza. Lei non ha nessuna esperienza su questa materia. Ritiene che questa mancanza di esperienza possa essere un ostacolo? Il secondo motivo di preoccupazione è ancora più forte. È indiscutibile che ci sia stata un'incapacità da parte del governo a prevenire il disastro che ha attraversato la città di Valencia. L'incapacità degli investimenti necessari per preparare il canale del Poggio ad un'alluvione a causa della vostra disastrosa e tragica visione costi-benefici. Ci sono 3 denunce nei suoi confronti. Signora Ribera, noi siamo preoccupati per la sua incapacità a gestire questa materia e lo siamo preoccupati come cittadini europei, perché quello che ha combinato in Spagna lo potrebbe combinare in qualsiasi altro paese d'Europa. Risponda sì o no, qualora si dimostrasse il suo coinvolgimento giudiziario nell'alluvione di Valencia, lei si dimetterà?
Okay, thank you for your question, but I insist on the importance to count on the distribution of competence between the regional and the national government. And it was not the factual or the prediction warnings that failed. It was the alerts dedicated to the population and the measures to protect the population that failed. And that's not under the responsibility of the national government. The national government was ready to help and was already working since very early in the morning. As many local authorities and public and private institutions noticed and adopted the right measures. But I will come back to this issue in the national politics. I think that it is important to take into consideration on why we cannot afford making the same mistake. We, Europeans, need to be serious in the warning alerts, in the assessment of the risk, and do not undermine the capacity and the confidence of those issuing these alerts, because it saves lives or we count on dead people. On the other aspect, I think that it has been said once and again. I think that, of course, competition policy is absolutely key. And I think that we count on a great team, on a great check and balance system, on my full commitment, and on the capacity to develop the tools in order to ensure a well-functioning internal market and to respond to the existing and incoming challenges in markets that go beyond the European borders. This is my commitment, and this is what I will try to do if confirmed as Vice President. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Katerina Konečná, non-attached member of the European Parliament. The floor is yours.
Děkuji, paní místopředsedkyně. Já mám 2 krátké dotazy. První se týká toho, jaké konkrétní opatření hodláte navrhnout poté, co Spojené státy odstoupí od Pařížské dohody. Plánujete v této souvislosti jako Evropská komise znovu přepočítat a přehodnotit plány na snížení emisí o 90% do roku 2040? A druhý je financování jádra, protože mi přijde, že se vyhýbáte a podle mě tady tomu vlastně nikdo nerozuměl. Víte, že bez státního financování či záruk se nepostaví ani reaktor, že? Tak jak se na to díváte vy? A prosím, neříkejte nám to, co jsme schopni si všichni přečíst v zakládajících smlouvách, protože je životně důležité pro některé členské státy, aby byli schopni vyrábět i v následujících desetiletích energii z jádra. A mně přijde, že se k tomu nestavíte dostatečně zodpovědně.
Thank you. I respect the decision of each member state. And as I said, when dealing with state aid, that is the way we have traditionally worked on a case-by-case basis, and I'm committed to keep on going in this direction. At the same time, it is also important to be aware of the fact that some decisions and frameworks were opened under this industrial alliance, taking note on the interest to develop an IPCI dedicated to nuclear equipment, and I think that this will be important to ensure innovation, so SMEs can be a reality, while counting on safe responses, but ensuring that those willing to promote these solutions can count on the existing framework. Dealing with the Paris Agreement, I think that it is an early stage still to think what may come from Washington. For the time being, the race has also been launched at the industrial and business case in the United States. And maybe if there is a market case to ensure that the investment does match the Paris Agreement goals, there may be a social demand to keep the existing regulation in the United States. I think that we need to concentrate on how we can ensure that things become easier and a much more levelized response, but not to accept that because there may be different political parties willing to do less or denying the possibility to do anything, we need to revisit our regulation. On the contrary, I think that what we have done is because it is a great driver to boost innovation, industry, and welfare for all.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Paolo Boccia for PFE.
Señora Ribera, voy a ser muy claro. Europa no necesita ni quiere otro Timmermans. The Green Deal opens the door to Chinese electric cars. The Farm to Fork tried to kill the European agriculture. The ETS is diverting maritime traffic to non-EU ports. While European workers, citizens and enterprises claim for a reasonable transition, a few months ago you criticized President von der Leyen for slowing down with the Green Deal agenda. I'm very curious on the way you will cooperate each other. In your mission letter, you were asked to work towards reducing energy prices and energy poverty. However, during your tenure as Minister of Energy, electricity prices reached record heights, and according to Eurostat, Spain has the highest proportion of its population in Europe unable to keep their homes adequately warm. So how do you plan to achieve for EU the same goals that you've not been able to reach for Spain?
Thank you so much for the questions. First, I'm not Franz Timmermans, so I am Teresa Ribera. I will do my best. I will do my best. Second, yes, the energy price is an important issue for all families, industry, small and big. And as I said, probably fossil fuels is not the best response to lower energy prices, but at the same time we need to ensure that energy prices can lower down, because we count on operational costs that are lower thanks to the technology that we use, because we count on interconnections and grids that are modern and being used in an efficient manner, because we count on other non-energy costs in our bills that are not as high as they are right now, and this is a complicated discussion for the time to come, and because we can take advantage of the complementarities of each energy system in each of our countries. So I think that we need to develop the things that are in our regulation and to identify where there may be challenges that still need new responses. But as I said, energy is a great opportunity to boost innovation, to recover competitiveness, and to afford the inequalities gap that we need to face. And yes, we need to take into consideration in a very serious manner access to energy at affordable price for all, so facing the energy poverty that many Europeans still face, not only through social policies, which are very important, but through proper isolation of their households, so to reduce the consumption for heating and cooling, and to ensure that other concrete solutions at a small scale can reduce the dependency of the grid and the system. So much needs to be done, and it is part of our priorities following the political lines of Madame von der Leyen.
I now give the floor to Bruno Tobak for the SND.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner Designate, welcome. The Clean Industrial Deal is obviously a flagship project for this Commission and very central to your portfolio, and it is rightly so, because right now it's the only credible roadmap to prosperity that Europe has. Of course, it makes necessary a number of choices. Apart from the automotive sector and the nuclear sector, I think we all, or at least most of us, are aware that the European economy has a number of other relevant sectors for that, and a number where we need to invest in. So I would like to hear from you, what are the criteria and what are the central sectors that you see where you need to take measures, and what will those measures be? And without giving the answer myself, I would say that revised public procurement framework will be part of that package. So my next question, last question, is how can we prioritize EU companies that contribute to decarbonizing our economy through that public procurement? Thank you very much.
Now, more question after 1 minute.
No, thank you so much. I think that your question is quite broad, but I will take this opportunity to develop a little bit on what I think we should be focusing on when working with Vice President Sejourné, Commissioner Hoekstra, Roswell, Albuquerque, and others, because I think that we need to combine Satu. Do not forget about labour market, skilling and reskilling people. I think that we need to address the energy price, as we were saying before. I think that we need to address how the traditional industry can be decarbonized and how we can support this decarbonization at the low cost, how we can make full use of the circular economy and the strategic autonomy and the partnerships that we may develop with our colleague Sikela, through our colleague Sikela, or Šefčovič with third countries to ensure that we have access to the raw materials, how we can unlock the incentives to invest in Europe, providing stability and credibility, including the goals. If we do not provide this stability around the goals, it could be very uncertain that people can trust us, and how we can simplify the whole administrative burden. You issue another issue which is very, very important, which is the fact that in many occasions the capacity of the public procurement to provide a signal to the suppliers, the providers and the SMEs that are behind the big providers is key. And I think that this deserves full attention, and to what extent this may be one of the elements to be included in the Clean Industrial Deal. So not too much to have an exchange on what concrete sectors we are thinking of, but how we can make full use of the different tools to provide a much more cross-border and cross-cutting approach on this transformational engine that we need to put in place. I take note of the recommendation, and I think that it is worth it to explore and to work around. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Peter Liese for EPP.
Vice President designate, personally I went to this hearing open-minded, but I have to be honest, I didn't find a lot of arguments to convince my group that you are the right one, but I give you two other chances to give clear commitments that will also please the EPP. First, on the protection of farmers against the wolf. You know that this Parliament started a process to reduce the protection of the wolf, and we mean it especially for the farmers. The Commission and the Council supported that. You didn't. So now you are the responsible Vice President. If confirmed, will you fight like a lion for the new position? Second, my colleague Christian Ehler and me, we gave you a paper on the competitiveness in the Green Deal, how to make Europe more competitive by keeping the climate targets but changing the Green Deal. Did you read it, and do you support the proposals, in particular to include negative emissions in the ETS, yes or no?
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Dealing with the species, I think that, well, it is ongoing, the process, and there will be a need to go to the Berna Convention and then to incorporate in the European legislation, and then to accept that each member state can decide on whether this is the basic protection or other protections, and what are the means to come up to support the farmers, which is also very important. And counting on real data is very important too. So it depends on how sound the real data may be in order to take the decisions. Dealing with your document on competitiveness that I find quite interesting, and your comments on to what extent negative emissions may be an issue to be introduced in the review of the ETS. I think that probably we will need to go beyond what it is the low-hanging fruit that we need to accelerate right now, and to start thinking how we can create the atmosphere, the ecosystem, to ensure that we can resolve those emissions that we will not be able to solve beyond 2030, 2040. So I think that this is a very interesting proposal to be taken into consideration in due time, and to develop the methodology not to make a mistake, but on the contrary, to ensure that it can work in a smooth manner.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Sarah Mathieu for the Greens.
Dear Commissioner Designate, just transition, that means more financing, especially for the Social Climate Fund, but it also means better financing. And we know that public funds are often used to cover corporate risks. That, of course, benefits the companies, the shareholders, but less the taxpayers or the citizens. So do you commit that national state aid and EU funding needs to be conditional on fulfilling environmental and social commitments, like the just transition plans, like decent wages, respect for workers' rights, reskilling and banning of dividends and share buybacks? Will you claw back the funding when companies have not complied with those conditions? Will the new state aid rules exclude fossil fuel projects and large companies that face no barriers when it comes to access to private finance? And finally, workers need guarantees to the industrial transition that it is anticipated and managed well. So will you propose a directive on just transition that includes social dialogue and collective bargaining? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions to be worked out with my fellow colleagues dealing with funds and dealing with the Just Transition Fund, Commissioner Hoekstra. I think that this is very, very, very important. Such a deep transformation in our energy model, in our industrial model, requires paying attention to workers and requires ensuring that the transition is just. And we have developed different measures, including the creation of the Just Transition Fund that took some time to kick off, and that is still under the assessment of to what extent it is enough, how it can work, and how it can be combined with other funds that have similar social approaches in different regions. So what I can commit right now is to be sure that I will do my best to ensure that workers have a role to play in this transformation, and that public policies should be supporting this impact, or the responses to this impact on workers. Training and reskilling, but also creating the opportunities. It is not just a transfer of wealth. It is being sure that we invest in the creation of new opportunities. Otherwise, it is not going to work. We need to be sure that people feel owning this transformation. And people is workers and consumers.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Anna Zalewska for ECR.
Pani kandydatko na komisarza, mówię o tym z ogromnym żalem, ale mam, myślę, nieodparte wrażenie, bo dostaję SMS-y od przemysłu, że wygłasza Pani manifesty polityczne, a nie recepty, a nie pomysł, a nie zaangażowanie, a przede wszystkim źródła finansowania. Proszę nie zaczarowywać rzeczywistości. Europa nie tylko jest na zakręcie, ale jest już w tyle. O tym mówi zresztą raport Draghiego, pokazując, że potrzebujemy 8 800 miliardów euro rocznie. Proszę o propozycję, skąd 800 miliardów rocznie i proszę, bo on tego nie policzył, ile trzeba na sieci przemysłowe, o których pani tak często tutaj mówi, bo zdaje się, że to nie miliardy, ale biliony euro. Mówi pani o tym, że trzeba zapobiegać kryzysowi mieszkaniowemu przy pomocy dyrektywy budynkowej o efektywności energetycznej, tylko pani to podroży. W związku z tym proszę o konkrety i szczegóły.
I agree with you on the importance to provide solutions, and not only to provide obligations or to provide deadlines or targets. And solutions means investing in the retrofitting of the housing, starting by the most vulnerable people, and providing sufficient finance to be able to do so. So working with the local authorities and identifying when, how this can be done in an easy manner. I think that we have lots of ideas and we need to craft a consistent response. And I think that when dealing with funding, we need to identify the best ways to de-risk the private investments and the best way, the most effective way to combine, to pool public and private funding, public coming from the European funds, public coming from the national governments. This was why I was commenting on the IPCIs, because it is a nice idea that is being quite successful, how we can combine this public funding to ensure that there is a right answer and right incentive for the private investment to catch in. And this is not the only way. I think that working on capital markets, working on finance and regulation of finance, using the taxonomy that has been developed in the previous mandate will be quite helpful. I'm not saying that what we need to do is easy. Of course not. But I am convinced that if we react in a united manner and we pay attention to the different contributions that each of us and each of the different stakeholders can do, identifying where the barriers and the difficulties may be, we can do it. Because we have already done it in a very difficult circumstance, with the unprecedented crisis on energy prices or with the unprecedented crisis on health issues during the COVID. So I'm deeply convinced that we Europeans can provide the right answers, can invest in a much more competitive industry, can invest in people, but we need to discuss the potential solutions.
Now I give the floor to Emma Wiesner for Renew.
Thank you so much. I have 3 questions. In the coming years, we will have to focus a lot on the implementation of the Green Deal, but there are also regulatory gaps, and you will oversee the work on the bioeconomy strategy, the Circular Economy Act, and the market for secondary raw material. However, there are very few incentives for using those alternative raw materials compared to our fossils. We have the polluter pay principle, but there's no pricing of fossil raw materials. So my question is, what concrete step will you take to close the legislative gap on transitioning to alternative materials? Second question. How would you deal with member states as vice president of the Commission, with member states not fulfilling their climate target, just like Sweden, projected not to reach the mandatory climate targets? And thirdly, Mr. Orban is right now in Baku at COP29 saying that we should keep using fossil fuels as business as normal or business as usual. What's your message to him?
I think that we need to create the markets and the infrastructures to ensure that using circular second raw materials is more efficient and more appealing in terms of pricing than raw materials as such. And we have some nice experience, but a lot needs to be done yet. The market does not exist yet. The infrastructure, so the certainty on the availability is still to be improved. And that I agree with you. You were mentioning taxing possible tools. And I think that this is something to explore. To what extent the recommendations on the energy tax directive may help to prioritize this type of uses. And you were also commenting on member states not fulfilling its target. That's, of course, something that deals with the agenda of Commissioner Hoekstra, and I think that the most important thing is to focus with sufficient anticipated time to ensure that everybody delivers its target, because we jointly need to deliver, but we individually need to deliver too. Then you enter into something which is also critical, how we can work in a united manner with a common voice to develop our capacities to decarbonize and to fight against climate change. And I think that we have done a lot. We have done a lot of good things, but we can still do better. There are other chiefs of government in Baku asking for the fulfillment, for the honor of the Paris Agreement, and being solidar with other parties to the UNFCCC that suffer much more than ourselves the climate impacts.
Now I give the floor to Ange Arndt for ESM.
Frau Ribera, in meiner Heimat in Ostfriesland verlieren wahrscheinlich in Kürze 8.000 Menschen ihre Arbeit bei VW, weil die EU willkürliche CO2-Flottengrenzwerte für Automobilhersteller festgelegt hat. Diese verursachen hohe Strafzahlungen. E-Autos sind 2019 als emissionsfrei erklärt worden. Das war eine schwere Täuschung der Bürger, weil auch E-Autos umfangreiche CO2-Emissionen verursachen. Darauf hat meine Partei, die AfD, schon damals aufmerksam gemacht. Die aktuell gültige Verordnung zu den CO2-Emissionsnormen für Autos legt in Artikel 7a fest, dass die Kommission bis zum Ende nächsten Jahres eine Messmethode vorlegt. Eine Messmethode, mit der die CO2-Emissionen aller Pkw-Arten über den gesamten Lebenszyklus erfasst werden können. Wird die Kommission diese Verpflichtung einhalten und werden Sie dafür sorgen, dass diese Täuschung, E-Autos werden emissionsfrei, endlich beendet wird?
I acknowledge, and I have in the list of my priorities and concerns the situation of the car industry in Europe. I have said it in several occasions, and I think that we have to come to support and to identify the best pathways to ensure that the car industry in Europe remains competitive and the value chain around the car industry is still an European-based and innovation industry in Europe. I do not think that changing the targets can help into that. I think that we need to concentrate our efforts on the identification of the concrete measures that can help into this. And there are good examples. I think that we have tried to develop these common initiatives around electric vehicles and batteries, and we may need to get much more deeper in this approach. Dealing with the methodologies to count the emissions, I think that we need to pay attention. Some of your colleagues pointed during the conversations I had in the previous weeks that there may be many delegated acts that can be written, drafted in different manners, meaning different things and having different impacts. So I think that we need to pay attention to be consistent and to ensure that what it is provided makes sense.
Thank you. And last speaker of the second round of questions, Carola Rackete for the left.
Madame Ribera, you have mentioned several times the importance of science. And in the written questions, you mentioned that the success of the EU in decoupling economic growth from emissions. However, that is only so if we do not take into account anything which we are importing. So my questions are, firstly, do you agree with me that what actually matters is rapid and absolute reduction of our resource consumption, and to prevent the destruction of our living planet, that we actually need a cap on material resource consumption and also binding reduction targets? Will you implement those in the EU, as well as will you push for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty? Thank you.
Thank you for the two questions, because in fact it is true that one of the most frustrating things is that sometimes when we improve the efficiency, we do not provide net reductions because the efficiency brings back more consumption. So I think that we need to address this issue. And I think that this explains to a certain extent why it is not only a question of engineers, but also a question of social preference and values. So I think that education is very important in order to address the type of suggestions that we are making. Education and cultural values, priorities, how to reduce consumption and how to be more efficient in the use of the different materials. Then you raise the issue of fossil fuels and how we can ensure that there is no proliferation. We achieved something last year which is very important and that is being challenged in certain places, transitioning away from fossil fuels. And I think that transitioning away from fossil fuels can cover many things. And of course, one of them is non-proliferation of new fossil fuels, fossil fuels exploitations. So I think that, yes, there are initiatives trying to identify how to ensure the most successful result in terms of getting rid of fossil fuels. And one of them, very obviously, is to facilitate no more fossil fuels exploitations. Dan Jorgensen, the Commissioner in charge of energy, has been working a lot about this, and I think that for the time being, there may be no consensus at the European level, so to reach an agreement being supported by all the member states, but I think that there is a consensus, a broad consensus, on the need to transition away from fossil fuels.
Perfect. Now we are moving to the third round with the invited committees. The same rules apply. 1 minute for question, 2 minutes for answer. And we start with the chair of IMCO, Madam Cavazzini. You have the floor.
Buenas tardes, Señora Ribera. So I'm asking the question on behalf of the IMCO committee, and I know you mentioned already the DMA today. I'm sorry, I'm in another hearing. That's why I just jumped in. But nevertheless, probably you could be a little bit more concrete. You stated in your written replies that the vigorous enforcement of the DMA will be one of your priorities, and I think my committee shares this. The European Parliament has repeatedly called for an increase in the human resources and technical capabilities necessary for the effective DMA enforcement. Can you spell out concrete measures you intend to take to ensure that the Commission is well equipped to monitor compliance and timely enforce the DMA? You further state in your written answers that one of the 3 important dimensions that will guide the prioritization of your work on the DMA is to give consumers choice when gatekeepers impose on them their own terms and conditions. So could you please specify in concrete terms, how do you plan to empower consumers and provide them with more control over terms and conditions in their position against the large digital companies?
Thank you so much for your question. And the answer is probably a combination of the capacities and the tools that the services of Vice President Virkunen and myself need to ensure that work in a very smooth and effective manner. Because I think that, yes, we need to open up these locked ecosystems in this digital world where there may be limitations to introduce new startups or new services being provided in any type of platform or device where we can access to these services. And we need to protect the capacity of consumers to make full use of their data. So the data belongs to the consumers or those providing the data, not those that get the data through the platforms and the digital solutions. And the gatekeepers being identified had some deadlines to comply with their do's or the not do's being introduced in the Digital Markets Act, and we will start seeing what it is happening and to follow and to be transparent on how this has been achieved or not. So I think that this will require many more people working in the team. And of course, I cannot commit not being commissioner yet and not knowing yet how it works within the services of the Commission, but I can commit to do my best because I identify this as a very complicated issue that goes beyond our borders, that works in a different type of context, far away from what it has been the traditional way to deal with these competition problems. And it will require very specialized people and services that should be helping in the proper identification and monitoring of the compliance coming from these players. Working with the national authorities is a great help, but probably it is not enough and probably it is not structural.
Perfect. Moving to the Vice Chair of EMPO, Madam Wojcik.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Ribera, EMPL Committee is not fully satisfied with your written answers. Could you please elaborate further with clearer and more concrete commitments on the following questions? What concrete measures will you take to ensure that the most vulnerable households are protected and that the transition is beneficial for workers, that their rights are respected and promoted, and that no one is left behind? What concrete measures will you take in the better regulation agenda to ensure the EU labour law acquis and to ensure improved employment rights and social standards? In addition, which concrete steps will you take to combat energy poverty as a part of addressing the housing crisis?
Thank you so much. And these are issues where my intention is to work very closely with Vice President Minsatu. I think that Europeans cannot trust on their institutions if we do not pay attention to this type of concerns. How do we work and develop policies towards vulnerable households? How we ensure that workers count on the same rights and can count on elements to develop their skills and training capacities, and how rights may be respected. And we may be bound by the existing laws, but we may improve the existing laws and regulations, or to try to identify the best possible ways forward on the basis of consensus and improving the social dialogue and the conversation with the social players. I think that a better regulation in labour rights is important. It's not part of my duty, but I will support Vice President Minsatu. It is part of my duty to try to identify the means to combat energy poverty, particularly in the households, access to affordable energy and retrofitting houses, very much in particular starting or focusing the most vulnerable houses. This is something that can be done by member states, but this is something that should be promoted and backed from the European institutions. This is something where we already may count with existing funds, and this is something that should be part of the priorities under the Social Climate Fund and under the Just Transition Fund. So my commitment on that, both dealing with the competition measures, but at the same time working with my colleagues dealing with energy and climate, is very much giving priority to these focused vulnerability approaches to deal with energy poverty and to deal with the retrofitting of houses.
Madam Vosenberg, the Chair of TRAN.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable Mrs. Ribera, as Executive Vice President, you will be responsible for modernising the EU's competition policy and for developing a new state aid framework under the Clean Industrial Deal. How will you be dealing with unfair competition and state aid from authoritarian third countries in the transport sector? In particular, how will you handle foreign direct investments in critical transport infrastructures in Europe? Your written answers do not openly address this particular challenge from countries such as China. On another page, when looking at the competitiveness of SMEs that you mentioned, how concretely will you contribute to reducing administrative burden in EU legislation that has an impact on transport and tourism? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I think that Probably there is not a silver bullet, but there are different tools that can address this type of problems. We do not want Trojan horses that may challenge the existing European business that compete on a level playing field. It is much welcome to count on private investors coming from abroad, but we need to ensure that the level playing field is applied to all and that we pay attention to avoid any type of subsidized product that may create a real problem for our companies, for our business communities. At the same time, it is true that there are other existing tools such as the control of foreign investment, dealing with trade, the CBAM, so paying attention to avoid that we may count on carbon leakage because we do not treat in a similar manner products that do not pay for what they pollute. And at the same time, we need to address this discussion also in the new guidelines dealing with mergers. So how we can ensure that this new approach, counting on time horizons where there may be potential new investors that may be taking positions in our market that could challenge through a non-fair approach the existing companies in our country. So I think that the combination of the different tools should help in order to ensure, as I said, a fair treatment for all, either if they come from a member state, small or big, or either if they come from abroad, but that comply with the World Trade Organization rules and that do ensure a proper respect to the existing rules in Europe.
We're moving to the Vice Chair of Regi, Madame Mebarek, the floor is yours.
Madame la Présidente, Madame la Vice-Présidente exécutive désignée, au nom de la Commission du développement régional, nous apprécions votre engagement à soutenir les régions touchées par la transition vers une économie neutre pour le climat. Pourriez-vous nous apporter des précisions sur les points suivants? Proposerez-vous la création d'un fonds de transition juste 2.0? Si tel est le cas, comment envisagez-vous les développements futurs du fonds de transition juste? À défaut, soutiendrez-vous l'intégration des objectifs de transition juste dans les autres fonds de la politique de cohésion? Ou bien êtes-vous favorable à l'abandon des instruments actuels de la politique de cohésion, tels que le Fonds de transition juste, au profit d'un modèle de facilité pour la relance et la résilience qui serait élargi à tous les domaines d'action pour un programme national unique?
Merci pour la question. Je pense qu'il faut assurer la compatibilité, la complémentarité des différents fonds, mais pas supprimer les fonds pour la transition juste. On a besoin d'un fonds pour la transition juste. Et bien sûr qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres fonds qui ont un impact régional sur les territoires, sur les gens qui habitent dans un territoire concret qui est dans un processus de désindustrialisation très dangereux pour créer des opportunités. Je disais tout à l'heure qu'il ne s'agit pas d'un transfert des ressources full stop. Il s'agit d'investir sur les gens et d'investir sur la création de nouvelles opportunités. Et le Just Transition Fund has kicked off a very short time ago. So I think that we need to develop to ensure that it can deliver. And we need to learn from the experience, and I think that there are many different experiences in the different member states that can help to ensure that it is performing since the very first day. That could be my very bold comment. Yes, I'm committed to a just transition and to take into consideration the social concerns when accelerating the transformation of our economy, when ensuring that we are going to be competitive and count on a clean industrial deal, but a clean industrial deal that addresses the industry and the business community, but also addresses the people, the Europeans.
Last in this round, the Chair of Agri, Madam Vrecionova, please have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Ribera, on behalf of the Agri Committee, I would first like to know that your answers to the question on the role of agriculture and forestry in the just transition were somewhat ambiguous. Therefore, I would like to repeat my question on how agriculture and forestry are included in the just transition, especially with regard to accessibility of water. In order to achieve the EU's ambitious climate targets and climate neutrality by 2050, agriculture will also have to contribute to reducing its emissions. How do you intend to support the sector in reducing emissions without disregarding the fact that ensuring food security must remain a priority? What are your ideas regarding animal husbandry in this context? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that food security is a must, and I think that quality of life of our farmers is a must too. I think that the fair policy needs to address both things, taking into consideration that, of course, there are big challenges in terms of climate impact, as you say, but there are big, important contributions through the farming that are not fully recognized in many cases. This is why I think that my commitment to work with Commissioner Hansen to follow the consensus being achieved around the work being led by Professor Strohschneider is so important, because he managed to get something which is really difficult, which is a broad support coming from many different stakeholders and people that work on the ground around these issues. Then there are another aspect, or there are two other aspects that you are raising, how this can be recognized through the existing climate policies in a positive and monetary manner. And I think that you are right. There are different aspects that need to be addressed because they contribute in terms of sinks, because they contribute in terms of preventing other type of risk for soil quality or for production of food, or preventing wildfires, so many relevant things. And my impression is that we will need to pay attention to this in the context of the review of the ETS and the adaptation plans, how the agriculture sector may contribute to the common efforts, but at the same time may be recognized through the common efforts too.
Thank you. We had almost perfect timings in this round, so thank you so much for respecting the rules and your colleagues in the room. Let's hope for the same behavior in the final round. And we are starting with Marcin Sipniewski, ECN.
Dziękuję bardzo. Szanowna Pani, to bardzo źle, kiedy ideologię włączamy w regulowanie gospodarki i Zielony Ład jest tego kolejnym przykładem, dlatego że bardzo ładnie się mówi o redukcji emisji, o transformacji, natomiast kryją się za tym wysokie ceny energii i też upadek zakładów pracy, utrata pracy przez wiele osób. Jakie ma Pani konkretne propozycje w zakresie obniżania cen energii? Czy zgadza się Pani na przykład z wnioskami zawartymi w raporcie Dragiego i jego apelem o oddzielenie cen energii elektrycznej od gazu, czy też proponuje Pani inne rozwiązania? I jakie konkretne środki przewiduje Pani dla energochłonnych gałęzi gospodarki, na przykład dla przemysłu stalowego, niezwykle istotnego? Mówimy tyle o obronności, o budowie mieszkań, natomiast ten przemysł został bardzo mocno dotknięty w efekcie transformacji. I w jaki sposób zamierza Pani wesprzeć właśnie tą gałąź przemysłu?
Thank you for your questions. I think that there were a few in your question. The first of them being something that I don't know if I have understood properly, which is that you think that it is the Green Deal that raises the price of energy. If this is the case, if this is what you said, I disagree. I think that it is on the contrary. The renewable energy solutions that have been boosted in the recent years have very low operational cost. A different thing is that we may need to upgrade that, to invest in our infrastructure, our grids, our storage, our capacity to modernize our infrastructures, which is important. But as I said, the highest cost of energy and volatility of energy prices is connected very precisely to fossil fuels that we do not produce. This is why we need to be sure that we do it taking the opportunity to build new opportunities and to think on the industrial equipments and the industrial innovation that is connected to this energy transformation. So not thinking on the colors of the electrons and the molecules, but thinking on the industry and the services that we need to put in place. I think that this is going to be very important also for the steel, as you say. The basic industry is capital in Europe. We cannot lose the basic industry in Europe. And the cost of energy is one of the major headaches that they are facing right now. So we need to adapt our energy model as soon as possible. And as I said, to take into consideration and to promote every single line to reduce the cost of energy, including the change of in the way we generate our electricity. What we should avoid, and this is part of my competence as responsible for competition policy, is a subsidy race between member states, because that undermines decades of construction of the single market, and it will be difficult to last in time. So I think that we need to identify very well when and how it may make sense to count on state aid to support the next step, the innovation, and so on and so on. And if we can do it, and Draghi and Letta stated in the reports, through cross-border solutions, it could be better, because we could be in a position to create much more of ecosystems and reducing the vulnerabilities in terms of industrial value chains than just concentrating in who is going to pay more in terms of subsidies. And I think that this is something that we need to deliver with Vice President Séjourné. And my impression is that we can respond to some of these questions in the Clean Industrial Deal and some of these questions in the Energy Price with Commissioner Jorgensen.
We have to move to the next speaker. Jonas Huyosted from the left. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. Commissioner Designate Ribera, first I would like to congratulate you for the patience you've shown here tonight. It's quite impressive. My question concerns the connection between inequality, emissions and climate. According to Oxfam, the richest percentage of the global population causes as much emissions as the poorest two-thirds of the global population, 5 billion people. If these ultra-rich do not change their patterns, do not change their way of living, do not cut the emissions they are causing, we will not make it. And my question to you is, what will you do to make sure that the policies are directed to those who actually causes the major part of the emissions, the ultra-rich and the big global corporations? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question, because I agree very much on this approach. I think that it is pretty unfair, the impact of climate change, the impact of lack of action, the cost of inaction, creates additional burdens for the most vulnerable people. And we can see it in many aspects of the day-to-day life. For instance, we were discussing before on the energy cost. The share of a family income being dedicated to a badly isolated house when it is in a vulnerable family is much higher than when it is in a wealthy family. So there is an intrinsic aspect of inequality that we need to address. And I think that speaking about climate policy is important for many reasons. We have been commenting on the economic competitiveness and the industrial race ongoing, but I think that there are also aspects of social inequality that needs to be addressed. And we need to learn to promote, to introduce these aspects when assessing our tools and our decisions, but also to define new approaches in case they are required, internationally, but also at the European level. We have poor people that have many more difficulties to cope with climate impacts or with the impacts of this transition.
Michael Bloss from the Greens.
Dear Teresa Ribera, here directly in front of you. After the election victory of Donald Trump, a climate conference is taking place in a fossil autocracy in Azerbaijan, where today the European Union is represented at the Global Leaders Summit by Viktor Orban. So it doesn't look good for climate policy right now. But the right wing of this House is not always coherent, but in September they were asking in a resolution on the floods in Eastern Europe for an ambitious implementation and scaling up of climate action. So my question is, will you live up to the demands of the EPP and make sure we meet our 2030 climate targets? And will you come up with an ambitious post-2030 climate package, and with what content? Second, will you make sure we have an early and targeted revision of the European climate law so we can provide a predictable policy framework for investments in our industry? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, starting by your last question, I think that in my mission letter is quite clear, as it is in the case of the mission letter of Vice President Sejourné and Commissioner Hoekstram, and I feel fully committed to my mission letter and the political guidelines that I very much share. I think that the Clean Industrial Deal counts on a great driver around the decarbonisation, and the 90% reduction target by 2040 should be part of this capacity to facilitate the transformation. The question now is how we can frame the different tools so to show that we can achieve this goal, and so to show how we can combine the different elements around the clean industrial measures or the finance measures. And I think that this is going to be one of the challenges ahead of us. The second question you were raising is how we can ensure that we scale up our climate policies and how we can ensure that our role in the international summits and international negotiations is fully consistent. And there I appreciate very much the efforts being made by the Europeans for a very long while, as I said, because I'm convinced that we are investing in ourselves, in our industry, in our societies, in our economy. But I am a very convinced person around the United Nations and the multilateral order. And I think that happening here or there, what it matters is that the host commits to the result, and that we can feel proud of the European leaders and the European negotiators making their best to keep on advancing in this big challenge that represents responding to climate change. But the two aspects, the external dimension and the domestic dimension, matter in this case. So yes, I think that we cannot go back in our climate ambition, but I think that we can do much better than what we have done right now in identifying what is the common ground and what are the concrete measures to pave the way to achieve the goals.
Ludwig Odor from Renew.
Madam Commissioner-designate, your job is quite easy. Deliver to us clean, just and competitive transition. It sounds very easy. But of course, we can discuss a lot of topics, but I would like to hear from you three clear priorities, what you would like to do during your mandate, and what would be a kind of your three goals to achieve. My second question relates to the Draghi report. And according to Mr. Draghi, Europe needs bigger global players in some sectors, but that might undermine, of course, competition and hurt consumers internally. So how would you like to reconcile those two conflicting objectives? And I saved 10 seconds. Thank you.
I may say that my easy task could be possible with your help. So I hope I can count on you to develop the right answers. And when I say you, is the whole Parliament, of course. No, I think that it is a very nice question. What are the expectations for this mandate dealing with this title, with this headline? I could say that there are at least three, but I will concentrate on these three. The first of them is that I would like to be living in a much more fair access to affordable and stable energy for all. So to reduce our dependencies from abroad and to use this reduction, this strategy to change our energy